gonna shut off my video in order to better the connection. Okay, so today, as you see, I will start a cycle, a very small cycle of lectures within our course dedicated to the relationship, let's say, between landscape and photography. So it's going to be today, the next time, and a seminar with our two guests on 22nd of November. I will send you the flyer as soon as possible, maybe today. It's ready. I think I didn't send you yet, but I will send you now. This seminar will be involving two scholars, and one of them is an architect, one of them is a photographer, and both of them are also researchers, Davide Tommaso Ferrando and Michele Anastasi. So we will go into a little bit through the researches of these two guests, through this idea of the city in the image, of the representation of the city, and how it entails also reflections on the transformations of the landscape. Anyway, today I would like to start by proposing you this sort of focus on Italy as a case study. So I collected some examples that goes, let's say, from the mid-19th century to nowadays, of some steps that I, in a more or less arbitrary way, selected to be meaningful, of some steps in the shift of the representation of Italian landscape, and that can be meaningful for us in order to accompany, in a way, the transformations of the landscape through the eyes of the photographers. So we come back a little bit to the first discourse with which we started the course of topics in landscape architecture, history, and theory. If you remember, the encroaching between real transformations and representations. So it is going to be these 3 lectures dedicated to these encroachings. Let's go into our case studies. So Italy has been, of course, let's say, we saw in the example of painters, for instance, how Italy has been always also a sort of source of inspiration for the creation of landscape painting. If you remember Lorraine and Poussin, they went to Rome and to the Roman Campagna for searching, in order to search the classical roots of landscape, and they created they inaugurated the genre of landscape painting in Rome, in this topos. So Italy has also a great tradition of photographic representations. Of course, it's not, let's say that there are also, we're not focusing on other countries only for didactic reasons, because I chose to focus on Italy because, let's say, we will have a sort of continuity from the 19th century to nowadays in some topics, in some subjects, as we will see. In order to comment how representations accompany the transformation, sometimes they also accompany a shift in the sensibility, in our perception, in the instruments we have to interpret the reality, of course. So the first chapter of this lecture is dedicated to the Alinari brothers. I don't know if you are familiar with this name. Of course, many of you are not Italian, so it's quite difficult for you to have familiarity with this name. But maybe for an Italian, the Alinari is saying something, although maybe you don't know exactly why and what. The Alinari brothers were a family, let's say, of photographers that since the mid-19th century contributed to shape a very consolidated and standardized image of Italian historical center, starting from Florence, that was the city where the brothers were settled, where they opened their photographic, let's say, company, small company. That it was an image of the Italian historical centers based on the idea of a stereotyped Renaissance-based image. What does mean a stereotyped Renaissance-based image? We are in the mid-19th century, and we are still also in painting, if you think of the linear perspective that aims at controlling, dominating the space and interpreting the space in order to express a sort of dominion of reason, of intelligence over the space. So it's a way of organizing the space in the representation that from painting influences a lot the photographic representations of the monuments, the cities, and the historical come si dice, heritage of Italian cities. So we're going to go a little bit very fastly into the story of the Alinari company. In 1852, Leopoldo Alinari opens in Florence. So Florence is also the root of Renaissance. So of course, Florence is the center from which the perspective vision as a concept, not only as a way of representation, but also as a way of interpreting the world, is spreading all over the world since the Renaissance. And in this moment, in the mid-19th century, we are still in this paradigm, central. We are exactly in this paradigm. We still didn't have the revolution of impressionism we are more or less near, but then we are still waiting for the avant-gardes to revolution the view, the laws of the vision, the concepts of visions. So Leopoldo Alinari opens in Florence this small photography studio that 2 years later, together with his two brothers, Giuseppe and Romualdo Alinari, will give life to the Fratelli Alinari business, the brothers Alinari business. The brothers' initial objective was to photographically reproduce all of the major Italian works of art in painting, architecture, and sculpture, which established their reputation among art collectors and historians. Additionally, in the second half of the 1800s, the brothers photographed Italian landscapes and cityscapes. So, as this first paragraph explains, the aim of this photographic studio is to document the works of art, of course, in painting, architecture, and sculpture, and secondarily, the cityscapes of the Italian country. So both the monumental emergencies and the city sceneries. In 1890, so at the end of the 19th century, following the death of Giuseppe and Romualdo, the son of Leopoldo, Vittorio Alinari, Leopoldo died in 1865. This is not very important to you, but just to understand, took the company into his own hands, and by then Alinari photography had decidedly carved out an autonomous place for itself on the cultural scene in Italy and abroad in the second half of the 19th century, transforming the business into a real leader in the sector. Vittorio would also open his publishing house with volumes devoted in particular to art history. In the new fine art and travel publications market, Alinari offers one of the richest image archives available. So we have to imagine how this company grows in size and production in these few decades at the end of the 19th century, spreading from Florence throughout all over the world in order to diffuse with the effect of diffusing a strong standardized image of Italian historical heritage all over the world. So it is a very big, huge archive of photographs that are the ones who circulate the most in the epoch of Italian cities and monuments, and that are also alimenting, in a way, feeding a very rich editorial market. Of course, the presence and spreading of these images and the availability of this image, they are many, it's a very rich archive that is always growing and growing, is also feeding a very rich market of editorial initiatives that spread all over the world this image of the so much admired and also touristically oriented and artistically oriented image of the Italian cities. Let's go to analyze a little bit a few of these images just to understand which is the standardized image that is circulating so much, and that you have to imagine that in 18th century and also the beginning of 20th century in the editorial market and all over the world really coincides with the image of the Italian cities, okay? Everyone, although maybe they didn't know the name of Alinaris, they knew, of course, they had seen in their lives the images of Alinari brothers of the Italian cities. They associated Italian cities, although maybe they never visited Italian cities, to the image conveyed by the Alinari brothers. So you can understand from this how much photography has been important in shaping the gaze, in shaping the interpretations, in shaping the knowledge. Of course, it is also a very important documentary, as I said, documentary aim. The art historians used these images to accompany their books, their studies, their researches, and to document the single buildings, single works of art, single works of architecture. And so the image had to be it had to be an image that was actually objective. So the aim of the way of photographing the cities and the monuments that Alinari brothers adopted and also come si dice, enriched during the decades is this objective vision based on the perspective model, the perspective Renaissance-based model. Here we see the view of a square, the Piazza Vittorio Emanuele in Florence. We immediately recognize Florence from maybe if you don't know the Piazza Vittorio Emanuele, you recognize immediately the city of Florence from a single element that is, of course, Santa Maria del Fiore. On the background of this building in the background of the photo, we can see the tower and the cupola of the Brunelleschi cupola of Santa Maria del Fiore emerging from the top of the building. So we have an immediate element that allows us to recognize and allows people to recognize the city of Florence. And at the same time, we have a sort of elevated view. You see that the view is a little bit elevated, is not a view from the road. That allows the photographer, and it is of course this effect is reached thanks to a photographic instrument, many photographic instruments that the Alinari brothers had had the possibility to have and to adopt, to not to deform, not to alter the proportions of the elements. So it should be a very objective documentation, not a view from the square, not a view from the level of the street. So nothing subjective, not a view of the single person strolling throughout the square, but a very objective view of the relations, architectural relations of these elements, and these sort of eventually elevated view of this square, in order to it's a vision that is not human, at the same time is not a bird's eye view. It's a middle between these two things. It's something that should convey the idea of a aseptic, not aseptic, but very objective perspectival view, in which the proportions are maintained in order to really understand the architectural elements in their real proportions, the real size of the square. Of course, you can imagine that if you shot the photograph from the level of this guy, of this guy walking in the square, the vision would be completely deformed. Okay, you wouldn't maintain the proportions between the building. You wouldn't have this sort of objectivized view that is similar, that is organized through the laws, the very rational laws of perspectival vision. This is an example. Then we have other, I will go through the photos in order to show you a little bit which are the subjects chosen by the Alinari brothers, in order also to convey a sort of traditional way of a sort of aesthetic view of the historical centers before their disappearance. So we are in an epoch in which, let's say, there have been great transformations. Imagine, for example, in Paris, I always mention the Haussmannian Paris, in which a huge part of the Vieux Paris is disappearing behind the great works of the Barone Haussmann. And there are photographers, one photographer in particular, who is documenting the places and the squares and the little corners of the Vieux Paris, in order to maintain the memory of these places that are disappearing in the great transformations of the city. So the Alinari brothers also have, although we are not in a moment in which these places are going to be devastated in a few years, but they have this this aim to documenting the heritage, to documenting the beauty of the historical center, and also in this case some artisanal work that are still alive in the middle of this medieval urban fabric. Or again here, the Loggia degli Artisti in Florence, in which we again see this elevated view, which allows to maintain the proportion within the buildings, to see it with this very objective and detached view the sculptures that are collected into the loggia, and the scale of the architecture in comparison to the coach with these men, the men that are sitting on the bench, on these benches, on these stone benches, architectural benches, that are not, of course, the subject of the photo. The subject of the photo is architecture, is the artistic heritage of Italian cities that is famous all over the world, that is celebrated all over the world, and that should be celebrated in these photographs. Again, Firenze, Santa Maria del Fiore, seen from a corner of a street. Again, there is this life in the street, but the men and the people in the streets are always very small in comparison to the scale of the architecture. And there are also, Alinari also experimented general views of the city in the tradition of in the painting tradition of the Vedutismo. Do you remember we talked about the Vedutismo in the first lecture? I explained a little bit who are the most important interpreters of the Vedutismo and why the Vedutismo is bringing a revolution in the conception of the city within their territory. And also the Alinari brothers stems from this tradition in order to create these photographic views, general photographic views of the city, in which, of course, there is a focus, the perfect geometrical center of the image, in this case, is constituted by Santa Maria del Fiore and its massive monumental presence in the fabric of the historical center of Florence, seen from the other side of the Arno. Again, the massive volumes and perfect geometric volumes with this geometric decoration of Santa Maria del Fiore, the incredible volume of its cupola, the Brunelleschi cupola, seen again from an elevated view, which allows to dominate the monument in its whole and in its proportions over the minute fabric of the city. We have this conception of the city that is still a conception based, that is actually almost true in Italian cities in the 19th century. Of course, the Industrial Revolution brings enormous transformation before in other European cities. So there is still this harmony, let's say, between the city and the countryside, and the presence of the monumental artistic buildings, and this relationship between monumental buildings and the minute fabric of the city that will be completely transformed within the next, the first, especially within the passage to the new century. Siena, you see that the view is always elevated, and sometimes there is actually a sort of void of people. There are not, the human presence is never the center of these photos, but always the spatial organization and perfection of these places is the aim of these photos. Venice, I just go on fastly because the concept is most of all, I think you grasped the concept. This is the Arco di Costantino in Rome, of course, in the Fori Imperiali. Again, we have these few people, very small human presences, which are conveying the sense of the hugeness of the monument, which is the very center and subject of the photo. The Tower of Pisa, again the Fori, and that's it. So, okay, for what concerns the Alinari brothers, you have to imagine the power of the huge, immense, diffuse spreading of these photos all over Europe, and not only in Europe, through editorial endeavors, through the circulation of the photos themselves, etc., of this huge archive of a sort of image of Italy linked mostly and almost exclusively to Italian artistic, monumental architectures and artworks. Okay, so of course these photographs contribute to shape a certain image of Italy as a place of huge artistic heritage. Of course, it is also true, but of course, there is not an interest on other subjects, but the subject is actually this. We are going now to analyze a completely different point of view. Of course, we are also actually much later, because we are in the years of fascist regime. We are at the mid-end of the 30s of the 20th century, and Giuseppe Pagano, a very important modern architect who died in Mauthausen in the Second World War because he was persecuted by the Nazi regime, and that at first was joining the fascism, was joining fascist regime before joining at the end of fascism to the resistance movement. So he crossed different stages of his political, let's say, adherence to fascism before joining the other side and be persecuted in a concentration camp. Why we are interested in Giuseppe Pagano? Because Giuseppe Pagano is proposing in 1936, is the curator of a section of the Triennale di Milano dedicated to rural Italian architecture, and that is an exhibition that is quite interesting and quite unusual, because it's not an exhibition made of drawing of architecture or projects of architecture or recent project of architecture, but it is an exhibition actually composed only of photographs of rural architecture throughout the Italian different regions. This is the catalogue of this exhibition in 1936 at Triennale di Milano. The title of the exhibition is actually Architettura Rurale Italiana, so rural Italian architecture. He curates this exhibition together with another collaborator, that is Guarniero Daniel, but the real say animator of the exhibition is Giuseppe Pagano. And this is also the occasion, in a way, this inquiry on rural house and rural architecture throughout Italy is also an occasion for Pagano to approach photography that will be a great passion for him also in the rest of his life. That will be not so long, but eventually it will be also explored in other occasions. So, of course, the inquiry of the rural architecture doesn't begin in 1936. 1936 is the final stage of a huge inquiry which had begun in the years before. Let's go to see. This is an image of the exhibition setting inside the Palazzo dell'Arte of the Triennale di Milano. We see how the exhibition was organized. We had a grid in which the photos were composed, photos that were organized according to the different typologies of rural architecture detected throughout the different regions of Italy. And of course, there were also some themes and interpretation accompanying this exhibition. We see in this pillar a title that says "Functionality of the Rural House." Functionality of the rural house, it's interesting as a title, as a choice for the title, because there are several reasons at the root of the interest of Pagano for rural architecture. Of course, one is an ideological reason. Maybe you will remember, or maybe you don't know, but I will just tell you very briefly that the fascist regime introduced an agrarian reform throughout the Italian territory, and especially in the Paludi Pontine. Maybe you will know about the new towns of the Pontine marshes that were recovered, reclaimed during the fascist regime in order to give back to this great area paludosa, no? This marshland area around Rome in Lazio, to the creation of sort of cluster of new towns, Sabaudia, Pontinia, Aprilia, etc. And together with this, of course, the regime also praised for an agrarian reform that was based on the reclamation of the expropriation of the latifondi, on the Battaglia del Grano, the struggle of corn, in order to promote an autarky of the production of corn in the country, instead then continuing to import the corn from abroad. So it's a huge campaign, political campaign of ruralization of Italy, in which maybe in part, of course, partly, this exhibition can be located. We have to remember that in this moment, Pagano is adhering to the fascist politic. On the other side, we have to say that the interest for rural architecture is a quite diffused interest in these years, also in other parts of Europe, and not only in Europe, but this is a very huge discourse that would need further explanations and further insights. But we only need to say that modernism, more or less in the 30s, together with this interest for Mediterranean architecture, etc., also promoted an interest toward rural architecture. And in Italy, it was linked, of course, to the politics of fascist regime, because modern architects saw in the rural architecture, in the rural house, in rural typologies, a sort of anticipation of modern solutions that was alternative to the Beaux-Arts eclectic and historic tradition. I will explain better as soon as we see the single photographs. Okay, we see other. In a way, standardized. So, what does Pagano find in rural architecture? Pagano finds in rural architecture throughout Italy the involuntary modernity of unconscious abstract games of shapes and volumes, something that is usually associated to modern architecture. If you think to rationalism or modernism in the 20s and in the 30s, you will think to a asymmetric play of volumes, of white plaster surfaces, flat roofs, and a sort of abstraction in the volumetric choices. What Pagano will try to find in this rural architecture is a sort of involuntary aesthetic that is already modern without the will to be modern. And also a sort of continuity between the needs, the functional needs of everyday life and the aesthetic that derives from these functional choices. So in a way, if you think at functionalism, the great myth of functionalism that has its great moment in the 20s and 30s, you will understand how many modern architects were searching for this functional aim in the anonymous architecture of very humble and simple structures that were conceived only to be useful, to be responding to certain climatic conditions, to certain technical or program uses and needs. Okay, so there is this search for something that was not the product of an of a will to aesthetize, of an aestheticization process, such as the architecture of academies, for example, and it was a sort of alternative background of architectural solutions and technical constructive solutions that were motivated only by the need by humble people to find the right solutions for actual needs, for functional needs, and for needs that were rooted in specific places, in specific conditions, climatic, resources linked to the resources of material present in the places that were so in a way local. So I quote from Pagano. This is a quote taken from Casabella. Pagano has been director of Casabella for some years, and he published on Casabella pieces on rural architecture before the inauguration of the exhibition in Triennale in 1936. So in this quotation he says, and this is very interesting in order to make you understand his aims and his purposes, he says, this immense dictionary of the constructive logic of man, creator of abstract forms and plastic fantasies that can be explained with evident links with the soil, with the climate, with the economy, with technology, is opened before our eyes with rural architecture. So it's a dictionary of architectural solution linked to this actual needs, the soil, the climate, the economy, the technology, linked to real things, to real structural conditions that is open before our eyes. Therefore, an examination of rural architecture conducted with these criteria can be not only useful but necessary to understand those relationships between cause and effect that the study of stylistic architecture alone has made us forget. And the analysis of this great reservoir of building energy, which has always existed as a stylistic background, can reserve for us the joy of discovering reasons for honesty, clarity, logic, building health, where the 19th century saw only Arcadia and folklore. So here we really understand very well what Pagano was finding in rural architecture. So something that was astylistic. So the Beaux-Arts tradition against which modernists were struggling, of course, was a very fundamentally stylistic way to approach architecture. Of course, it stemmed from the academic tradition. The Beaux-Arts school was still very, very strong. And in this case, we had a very big reservoir of astylistic solutions. Astylist is not actually definitely totally true, because of course there are also formal and stylistic choices accompanying the evolution of rural typologies. But we have to understand that this is the view, the specific view of a modernist architect who was trying to construct, to build his own story, a story that was useful to legitimate his own position, that was actually the one that modernism was not something based on aesthetic canons and models, but something based on the architectural answer to specific constructive or climatic or functional problems. Okay, so the myth of functionalism. And at the same time, it was a search for authenticity. Pagano saw in the rural house the authenticity that was not anymore, any longer, that he could not any longer find in stylistic academic architecture. An authenticity, a link between life and society, between society and architecture, between the shape of human environment and the society that produced them. That it was what he saw in rural architecture. And his photos are trying to reflect this position. Of course, we see here, I show you some example. I could not show all the photos of the exhibitions, but we can understand from the structure of the composition that he was trying to push quite a lot on aesthetical elements of these rural structures in order to underline the eventual similarities that he himself detected between rural architecture and modernist aesthetic. Of course, at the end, it was also a kind of aesthetic model, an aesthetic predilection, aesthetic preference for him. You see the abstraction of the image. The images were all black and white. They pushed a lot on the contrast between light and shadow. They had very strong contrast of lights. They were quite a lot organized in of course they were all had all the same size, more or less square. They also put at the center, the very center of the image, the architectural object in a very simple organization of the composition, with this division of the image in two sides. The one that is the horizontal, so the ground on which the house is raising, and the house itself with the background of the sky. So a very simple organization of the image in which the architectural structure is actually the very center, the very subject of the photo, and there are not so many details and elements around. So the interest is not understanding the house in its environment or the structure in its environment, in its context, but to understand really the constructive choices and the aesthetic product of these constructive choices. You see here also some pages from the catalog of the exhibition. The photos are not all organized in this way, but if you go through them, you will see how really there is a choice in on the subject that is also very important. For example, here in the cheminées of these houses in Veneto or Lombardy or central and southern Italy. So he also wants to detect the similarities, the continuities between, or the differences between the same constructive or functional elements, like the cheminée in this sense. In this case, for example, you see how the cheminée is a functional element, but it's also ends to become the aesthetical compositive main element of the composition of the facade. For example, in this case, if you see the cursor of my computer. So also the captions are really interesting because they are not much descriptive, but they are interpretative captions. For example, here it says documentation of some shapes of external cheminée used in Veneto with, okay, this is a description of the cheminées that are originated by the initial roof of paglia, and that are then transformed into stone, into masonry, come si dice? Not anymore ephemeral, but definitive elements. Okay, so comparison between the shapes of the cheminées typical of the rural houses in Veneto, Lombardy, and the central and southern Italy. But there are also more interpretative captions than these ones. Some of them are more descriptive, but some of them are very interpretative and talking about this game of volumes and black and white and games of light and shadow over the surfaces. These are also details of the special typologies of rural architecture in Italy that are the trulli in Apulia, and this is another structure that is a scalonated structure in the countryside of Trani. So you see how there is always this centrality and sort of abstraction, wheel of abstraction that is really aimed at detecting this simple volumetric conception due to functional reason of every typology that he is studying. In this case, there is a clear aesthetic valorization of these terraced roofs that in a way reminds to evoke modernist roof terraces and these very simple white plaster volumes of the roofs. You see the Mediterranean architecture, which was also a great myth of many modernist Italian architects in those same years. And these staircase and ramps that were moving the facade in a very articulated, volumetric way. Or here, this cascine, in which also the photographs are, as you see, pushing a lot on abstraction, this foreground of the ground, and then in the middle of the composition, there is the house in this very frontal view with the white plaster of the facade really emerging out of the black and white of the photograph, in order also to simplify the volume. So there is a very strong orientation and interpretation in the way of photographing these places and these houses. That is very interesting because, of course, it's the product of his own personal and also not only personal, but expressing the aesthetic predilection of a certain group, a certain milieu of architectural culture that were active in those years in Italy, and also based on a very on an updating on what was happening and what happened in the 20s and 30s on the European scenery. So Pagano was very updated about European architecture, of course. For example, this is a very beautiful example of the interpretative character, nature of the captions. In this case, Pagano writes, relations of pure volumes in the Candide means very white house, terraced house in the Gulf of Naples, and in the Masteria in the countryside of Taranto in the region of Mar Piccolo. So the fact that he attributes this sentence, relations of pure volumes in the white terraced houses in the Gulf of Naples, it means, and the photographs are showing it really, really well, it means that he really wants to, he's really trying to associate these pure volumes of the some rural architecture to the pure volumes of modernist architecture in order to, in a way, jump out of the stylistic architectural tradition of the academies. Again, these pure volumes of these huge cheminées that are characterizing so much with the functional element, the aesthetic effect of the facades. And as I said, photography has been, for Pagano, a great interest also beyond the inquiry on rural architecture that was expressed at its best in the exhibition in 1936, but it was also accompanying his career, his life as an architect. He was also always looking at things with an architectural eye. So we can see how Pagano interpreted the world with his camera, through an eye that is the eye of the architect, the eye who detects textures, materials, the difference between also in natural materials, but the effect of the texture of these natural materials and what they can convey in terms also of aesthetical effect. You see here this inquiry, very interesting inquiry on specific elements at different scales, from the top, from an elevated point of view, for example, in this case of countryside fields, or very close-up views of some ground patterns, etc., or these stone gravel surface. This is interesting because it's the architect who is detecting the structures, the visual structures of the materials that constitute our environment. And maybe there is the effect or the influence of some architectural movements, photographic movements as well, such as, I don't know if you ever heard about Albert Ranger Patch. He's one of the interpreters of Neue Sachlichkeit photography, of new objectivity photography, that is also working on close-up views of textures, of materials, of the geometrical structures inherent in reality. So in a way, he wants to put order in the reality by identifying the geometrical structures underpinning the real elements of the world around us. Here we have other images of, these are other photos that Pagano, that we can find in Pagano archives, and that are not part of the rural house exhibition. But you see that the interest in rural houses will be accompanying him for a long time. And that's it. So another example, let me see the hour. So it's 10:11. We started at 9:20. Perfect. So another example is the example of this beautiful photographic book that is the conception of the dialogue between two important figures. The one is the writer, journalist, narrator, and poet Cesare Zavattini, original that is coming from Luzzara, that is a very small village in the Po region, in the Po Valley, and Paul Strand, an American photographer who is a very important interpreter of what in the photographic, say, history is known as straight photography. th century by a lot of a group of American photographers, among which one of the most important is Stiglitz, Alfred Stiglitz. Sorry, I didn't have immediately the name. Alfred Stiglitz, and then was continued by other photographers like such as Walker Evans, etc. So Alfred Stieglitz, in the beginning of the 20th century, introduced this idea of straight photography. Straight photography was meant in opposition to the pictorialist movement. So it was a photography which was meant at being direct, straight. The term straight wants to indicate the fact that photography had to be direct, straightforward. It had to depict and to portray life as it was, with its harshness, with its also with its bad aspects, with the poverty, with the hard lives of peasants, for example. So pictorialism was the most diffuse movement in photography in those years, in the beginning of the 20th century, and it was mostly based on the aestheticization of the world through photography, while the straight photography introduced by Stieglitz and that Paul Strand took on his shoulder, let's say, throughout the 20th century, and this book in the 50s is again a product. It can be considered a product of this sensibility. Was meant to portray life as it is, as it appears, in its very harshness and contrast and contradictions, and also sometimes come si dice squallore? Poverty, banality, squallore in English, let me check. Squalor, yeah, misery. Ecco, misery can be a good word. So in 19 1953, there is this attempt that is coming out of the encounter between Cesare Zavattini and Paul Strand, that is called Un Paese. Un Paese means a village, a small town. That is, in this case, the town of Luzzara. Un Paese is one of the first Italian photographic books that will be an exemplary work for the relationship between image and writing, because the images are images produced by Paul Strand, accompanied by the text conceived by Cesare Zavattini and mostly taken from interviews to the population of these small towns. It narrates, through the images of the American photographer Paul Strand and the text by Cesare Zavattini, the lives and stories of the humble people of an Italian small town, Luzzara in the Po Valley, chosen as a mirror of the spirit of a people and of the universal rhythm of life linked to the earth. Un Paese has been a source of inspiration for various authors, photographers, writers, and artists, such as Gianni Berengo Gardil, for example, who together with Zavattini created Un Paese 20 years later in 1976. Luigi Ghirri, we will talk about Ghirri later on in this lecture, first in 1981, then together to the writer Gianni Celati in 1984 and 1989, Stephen Shore, another important American photographer, in 1993, Olivo Barbieri in 1996, and finally by the artist Claudio Parmigiani. This is just to say that starting from this editorial endeavor, that is Un Paese by Zavattini and Strand, the small town of Luzzara will become, very interestingly, although it's isolation, because it's a very, very small town in the Po region, in the Po Valley, a topos for contemporary photography. So a lot of photographers, important photographers, famous photographers, such as the ones I mentioned, will come back in the same places of Paul Strand's photographies in order to feed this tradition of photographic portraits of the people and places of Luzzara. It is very interesting. If you go there, there is the Foundation Cesare Zavattini, and there is a very incredibly rich library of photography that is very strange if you consider that Luzzara is a quite isolated small town. This is the cover of the book of 1953. Of course, we have to also locate the spirit of the book and the sensibility of the book within the neo-realist movement that is quite strong in Italy in those years, both in literature, stemming from literature, and then having a very big rich season in cinema. Of course, you heard about the movies by Vittorio De Sica, or by Rossellini, or by Lattuada, for example, that are all movie directors who introduce the new sensibility in the image and in the subject of their cinema. That is a sensibility toward the humble people, the peasants, and the derelict, marginal stratas of Italian society that until that moment were quite excluded or cut out from the great narrations, both in literature and in cinema. In the post-war period, this new sensibility and this new interest towards the life, places, experiences of marginal social strata of peasants, of workers, become to they are really at the center of the efforts of the intellectuals and artists and movie directors in the Italian cultural milieu. So of course, Un Paese can be located into this context, into this cultural context, bigger cultural frame. Let's go to see a little bit some of these photos by Paul Strand that are, as you see, they are aimed at expressing the life and this sense of let's say of yeah, the direct relationship between the life of the people, the works of the people, the activities of the people, the resources of the land, and the shape of their environment, both in the small town, in the urban places, let's say in the places in Luzzara, and in its immediate surroundings. That is, for example, the shores of the Po River, where the people of Luzzara also have a sort of continuation of their environment. So it is a book that wants to convey the sense, this universal sense of a tradition, of of a way, a certain way of life of this specific region of Italy that is taken as a universal example of this very strong link between people and land, in a way. This is a very humble corner of the city of the entrance, let's say, of one of the borders of the small town of Luzzara, with this sign that tells you that you arrived inside the town, and this bicycle and these very simple houses all around. Here we have again this elevated view, but in this case the life of the people, the life of this daily market in the street is the very subject of the photography, in which you see that the photographer is lingering on the scenes, the urban scenes that are happening beneath, in front of his eyes. For example, this conversation of a group of men that stops their run with the bicycle in order to have a chat with other men, with friends and the or the women that are shopping in this stand, or this, let's say, this tradition of the walk throughout the main street in the market day. Inside, let's say, all so this big choral, this monumental choral representation of a life, of a normal day of the life of Luzzara, in a day of collective gathering inside this frame of these houses of the facing the main street. Or here, for example, the old men gathering and just sitting out of the cafes, or the productive buildings. This is the milk factory, the latteria, with all this with the elements of the work, with the objects of the work that are characterizing this piece, the landscape in front of the building. Again, in front of the building, there is an interest toward these simple instruments of the artisanal and agricultural work that is the main resource for the city, for the small town of Luzzara. Or the professions, the professions of the artisans, of the handcrafters, that are in the book. They are organized in an interesting way, because you can see the images of the instruments and of the let's say, representing the professions next to the people that are using them. So here the peasant on together next to the view of the shores of the Po, in which all the product of the raccolta, the collection, has been deposited. And again, so the people together with their environment. Okay, so this is a neorealistic vision of a harmonious relations between the life of a small village in the north of Italy, and its territory, the shape of its land, the shape of the manufactured agricultural territory that is shaped by the labor of men, and that is in harmonious connection with the life of the people. Okay, so I propose to make a very small break of 5 minutes, and then we start again. Maybe we can have 2 breaks of 5 minutes instead than having just one big break in the middle of the lecture, if you agree. So now it's, oops, sorry, 10:25. We can meet each other again at 10:30. Here we are. The next, I want to the presentation. The next case studies that I'm going to show you is involving another very important photographer. In this case, he is not an architect. Really is really one of the most important Italian photographer in the second half of the 20th century, who is responsible of a great survey of the Emiliane cities, the cities of Emilia-Romagna, the region of Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy, and especially of the city of Bologna. We are at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. So as you see, we are moving forward and kind of we are going to reach very fastly a moment that is nearer to us and nearer to our sensibility. So we will accompany these changes in sensibility through a selection of case studies. In this case, we have the title of the chapter is the idealization of the medieval city as a model for planning and conservation. What do we mean? We have to make a small premise that allows us to introduce another discourse. That is the discourse on the conservation of the historical centers in Italy. You know that historical centers were celebrated in the photos of Alinari brothers. Of course, they were very famous all over the world. Italy was always renowned for the artistic heritage of its historical center. But we have to wait for the 60s in order to have a consciousness, a formalized consciousness and awareness of the importance of the conservation of the historical center in their whole, as a whole, not only in the separated, isolated, monumental nuclei characterizing them, but as organism, but as the coexistence between the monument and their environment and the fabric, the urban fabric. So this process will have a very important step in the Congress of Gubbio. The Congress of Gubbio in Tuscany is held in 1960, and it is the first Congress dedicated to the safeguards, to the conservation of historical centers in Italy, from which a very important document will be issued that is called the Charter of Gubbio, and from which the institution of the first National Association for Historical Artistic Centers will come out. So that will also bring, of course, this goes together with some important, for example, planning instruments. I can mention among the many others the efforts that the urban planner Giovanni Astengo is bringing about in, for example, the Assisi planning instrument, in which he introduces the necessity to safeguard the historical center also in its urban fabric, and he introduces a new methodology for the elaboration of the piani regolatori. That is, for example, the construction of a teamwork in which not only architects and urban planner, but also social economic resources of the population will be a constituent part of the planning instrument. So in 19, and of course it is this plan is happening in it will be not realized and applied, but it will be an important reference in terms of the attitude towards the historical center, this new updated attitude toward the conservation of the historical center, and not only of monumental presences. The law of 1967 is stemming from this process of this new awareness, let's say, that finds in 1960 in the Congress of Gubbio an important moment of systematization. The law of 67 identifies in the historical center a specific entity which would be safeguarded through specific laws and regulations. Interventions in the historical center has to be restricted according to the indications of the planning instruments. So the artistic historical heritage, the interest of the conservation efforts are not anymore only the single monuments, the single buildings and their surroundings, as in the Giovannoni point of view, no, the surroundings of the monument, but the whole historical centers, intended, meant as a specific entity. In this, at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, we have a very important reference, a very important experience in the field of the conservation of historical centers. That is the work carried out by the municipality of Bologna. The municipality of Bologna carries out interventions in the historical center of the city under the guide of an architect, that is Pierluigi Cervellati, who is playing a role in the administration, in the communist administration of the municipality of Bologna as a council member of the communist municipality, which will mark a new paradigm for the intervention in historical centers and will be object of study at an international level. So it will become a model for the intervention in historical centers, a model that now, of course, we don't consider anymore an updated model, but that in the 70s and in the 80s has been very important as an international reference. The process was initiated by Giuseppe Camposvenuti, another architect, in his action as city planning councillor as well as 1960, and by the studies for the redevelopment of the historic center entrusted in 1962 to Leonardo Benevolo, the historian and critic of our very famous historian and critic of architecture, that had roles, as I said, in the communist administration of the municipality of Bologna. In 1973, all these cultural backgrounds led to the elaboration of the so-called Piano Regolatore di Bologna by Giuseppe Camposvenuti. Of course, behind all that, there are the studies on morphological patterns and typologies and morphologies brought about by Muratori, for example, regarding the historical fabric of Venice or of Rome. But this is a very long story, so maybe we are not able now in the time we have to go inside, to go really through this cultural background. Anyway, what the Piano Regolatore di Bologna is trying to do is to, this is one of the tables, no, of the tavole of the piano regolatore, of the planning instrument of the historical center of Bologna, that was meant at trying to safeguard the medieval image of the historical center of Bologna, not only as a, let's say, as a sort of scenographic void facade, architectural facade, but also as the context in which certain professions, artisanal works, small commercial activities had always found their specific context of their specific milieu, their specific environment, their specific place. So the plan tries to maintain the activities, the small commercial and artisanal activities in the historical center, trying to rescue the medieval fabric of the historical center, to risanare, to better the condition of the medieval fabric of the historical center, and trying to avoid the disappearance and allontanamento, the disappearance of this small commercial and artisanal activity, which were considered to be integral part of the lively nature of these historical centers. So the urban scenery, the urban scenery without its specific activities is considered to be not complete. So it's a matter of maintaining its very nature, not only in terms of the image of the architecture, but also in terms of the activities that take place in it. So, okay, the idea is to rescue a uniform image of the city. There is also this other aspect that is important, and to which it is linked, the photographic inquiry that I'm going to show you now. There is this idea of rescuing this image. It is a uniform image of the city, of the historical center of Bologna, that is an ideally medieval image of an Italian medieval city. Okay, so facades gain a special role to maintain the image of the historical fabric of the city. So, of course, the plan acts a little bit differently and with specific instruments on several different neighbors and districts of the historical center, but with a common idea, that is the idea of eventually changing and transforming the interior of the buildings, but trying to maintain and rescue this very uniform and coherent image, medieval image of the historical center, that in Bologna, of course, is made especially of the presence of the portico. No? Now we will see the photos. And the second aim is what I was explaining before, that is to avoid social replacement and gentrification, and to maintain occupation and activities traditionally settled in the historical center, such as artisans, commercial activities, students, etc. So to avoid let's say, the displacement of these activities and the substitution and the gentrification of the activities in the historical center, for example, as it happened a lot in Milan with the or in many other historical cities or other Italian cities in which the historical center has been transformed into a sort of business office tertiary prevalent program. So the historical center in the case of Bologna is meant as a social and cultural entity or fact. So not only as an architectural fact, but as a social and cultural fact. So this is the important premise at the basis of what we will see now. And this is these are other drawing from the plan. You see, for example, the degraded fabric of the city, and of course, the fact that the historical center is made of this coherent morphological fabric of courtyards and small narrow streets characterized by the rhythmic sequence of portici, portici, in English is porch or portico. Other images. Okay, but this is a block of San Leonardo with as I said, there is a specific focus on several different districts and neighborhoods acting in a different way according to the local specificities. But what we are more interested in this lecture is the survey by Paolo Monti. Paolo Monti in 1960, between 1969 and 1972, will carry out, together under the orientation of Pierluigi Cervellati, an exemplary survey or census of the historic center of Bologna, which will be followed by those of other Emilian cities, such as Modena, for example. In Bologna, the first tests will be carried out in the Baraccano area, arranged like a film set. This is very interesting. The streets thoroughly cleaned from the garbage collection, the parked car removed, the signs and advertising posters removed, the traffic stopped by the traffic police. It will be the first campaign conducted in Italy by a single photographer and will stand out for its systematicity and completeness. More than 8,000 images of the city will be deposited by Monti at the Municipal Film Library. So at the basis of Paolo Monti's effort in Bologna is the idea of the civil servant, of a civil commitment to convey this image, this coherent image of the historical center of Bologna, in order for the architects and urban planners and administrators to rescue in their interventions and in their in adopting specific planning instruments for the city, in trying to maintain this coherent image conveyed by the photos. So the photos, as I read in the quotation, they are the recreation a little bit like in a film set, like in a movie set, so a little bit fake, of these views of the streets of Bologna that try to clean the view from the presence of modernization. So the presence of cars, the presence of advertising posters and signs, the garbage, etc. The historical center should be conveyed in this photographic survey in its medieval coherent image of the continuity of the urban front, the continuity of the sequence of the porches, and these black and white monumental views of these narrow streets and views of the medieval fabric. Okay, so it is interesting. Okay, this is the same as before. I don't have very high resolution photos. I'm sorry, they are not so beautiful. Here we see some signs, but of course maybe it was not possible to avoid any sign of modernization, but the attempt and the intention behind these photos is this: the attempt to convey an image of the city that is actually talking about its historic artistic value as a collective work of art. Okay, the city is a collective work of art. There are no people in these photos. In the Alinari photos, at least, you could see some small figures, sagoma of people strolling through the streets or sitting on the benches in front of the monuments. Here, there is no trace of people at all. It is only the architecture, the historical center as an entity, as a constructed fact that is the product of centuries and centuries of efforts. Other photos are also, let's say, depicting the skyline of the city, and not only from the inside, but let's say a view from the city from the top, that is identifiable in the emergencies of its towers, and so in this skyline of towers emerging from the continuity of the historical fabric, and etc. We go into another case study that is actually facing not anymore the cities, but especially the countryside, and in a very different way as Paolo Monti. Paolo Monti was animated, although he was a photographer, so he was animated also by artistic intentions. In the case of the survey of Bologna, the most important aim, and it was animated by, was the documentation of a certain condition of the historical center of the cities. In the case of Mario Giacomelli, Mario Giacomelli is from the Marche, and from the center of Italy, north center of Italy, and he is a self-taught photographer who also experimented a lot in typography, in typographic printing, and that produced a sort of transfiguration of the countryside of his own region, but not only of his own region, because he also worked a lot in the southern regions of Italy, that has been shaping for a lot of time a certain view of very dramatic view of the Italian countryside. Giacomelli's career will be divided between landscape and reportage. The common thread that will bind all his works is aesthetic influenced by the work in typography, as I said. The familiarity acquired in the printing phase takes on a primary role in his production. The signs he traces in his photographs are accentuated in the darkroom. His works are rich in exasperated contrasts, black and white taken to extremes, finding in abstraction a way to get closer to reality. So, in a way, we can say that this pushing of the contrast through the action on the photograph and on the pellicola after the shooting, in the production phase, in the printing phase, was very important for Giacomelli, because it shaped his expressionistic view of the countryside of Italy. And here we see a little bit some of the products of this approach. I will pass through these photos just because I want to show you many examples, but then we can comment on each one, and we can take a lot of time to comment on each one. But we can say also, we can also make a general, let's say, comment about these photos. That is this idea of the abstraction of the traces of the work of man over the land. For some, until some extent, we maybe can have a remind of the photographs of Edilizia Moderna, of the shape of the territory. You remember the issue of the magazine that Gregotti published in 1966, in which there was this emphasis on the figurative nature of the landscape, of the land, of the territory in general, the shape of the territory. We lingered a lot on this concept in our past lectures. Here we have these traces that are emphasized by the black and white and by the contrast that this emergence, this important role of the black in the photos of Giacomelli, that is, as I said, obtained during the printing process, and these whites that are very strong and almost expressionists. And it is always a little bit like this. And of course, it is also a matter of abstraction. In a way, he abstracts the forms of the territory in abstract shapes that can be evoking, for example, a painting by Clay, a painting by Mondrian, more, maybe Clay much more than Mondrian, of course. With these signs, you see this blackness of the sign of trees organizing the shape of the territory, and talking very dramatically about all the work, the hand labor of the peasants that in centuries have shaped the appearance, the image, the powerful image of these territories. And the abstraction is getting stronger and stronger. I didn't put the data of the photos, but we are, let's say, going very fastly throughout his works. A few examples of his vast production, in which you see that the elements become okay, there is a phone call, sorry, I don't know who it is. There is a figurative presence, because we see the trees, so we can recognize the trees in here. In this photo, in this one, we can recognize the house, but it is the only sign, the only symptom of the fact that these images are figurative, are actually depicting reality, are actually portraying a portion of reality, and they are not a simple composition of abstract lines and streets on or surfaces on the photographic paper. Or here you see this black is so deep that it is really conveying the suffering and the drama that is intrinsic to it, to this landscape. Or these lands that seem to be scarred, come si dice, feriti, that seem to be covered with scars, scarves, maybe, yeah, scarves, and with this air, let's say, spoiled tree at the not in the center, but as a fulcrum of the organization of the image. And also this emphasis on the differences of levels, on this aerial view that in a way flattens the movements of the earth in a single image. You see how so a certain idea, an ethical idea, a dramatic idea of the landscape, of the labor, of the people, of the life of the countryside is conveyed by these quite powerful, strong images that are talking about, that are creating a new aesthetic, of the Italian countryside, of the Marche countryside specifically, that is fixed in our memory, that is very strong in our gaze, that is become to impregnate very much our gaze. So of course, who knows Giacomelli's photos, and many of it is normal, let's say, to have seen some Giacomelli photo, because he had a great production and he was one of the most celebrated Italian photographers for a long time. Of course, he's also then looking at some of the shapes of the countryside through his gaze, and etc., etc. So always more abstract, in which you always see something that reminds you that you are in the real land, this tree. These are the trees. So there are different levels of the readings of these images. Or here, there seems to be a sort of a Munch, an Edvard Munch picture that is created by the lines, by these drawings that are inscribed, written in the landscape. Or this binary organization of the image, in which this the different surface created by the different treatment of the soil, agricultural treatment of the soil, are valorized. Also here you see three strips, horizontal strips are organizing the photos, and you see only one tree that is explained, that is talking about the scale, that is explaining, that is helping to understand which is the scale of the image that we see, that also can also be considered something else, something different, something abstract. Okay, and after Giacomelli, I want to show you fastly another case that is the one by Renato Bazzoni. Here we are again in a case in which photographs are mostly meant for a documentary aim, and a documentation that is aimed actually at preservation, at the safeguarding of the Italian territory after the economic boom, after these huge transformations and infrastructuring of the territory that we saw in our previous lectures, have contributed to damage, in a way, some of the important, let's say, of the places, some places in Italy that were considered expression of the beauty and of the harmony of this secular relation between the use of the territory and the shape of the territory. So what we saw, for example, in Un Paese, in Luzzara. Bazzoni is an architect, so he's a modern architect. He also designed some important buildings, especially in Milan. And he was among the founder, animator of the FAI, the Fondo Ambiente Italiano, before the FAI of Italia Nostra. So associations that were meant in the post-war years of the reconstruction of of Milan, and then in the economic boom, aimed at the protection of Italian heritage, in terms not only of artistic architectural monuments, but also of natural and environmental sites. So a Milanese architect in the post-war years of the city's reconstruction, an inspiring father of Fondo Ambiente Italiano, Renato Bazzoni designed industrial and hotel buildings, homes and hospitals, but his passion has always been rural architecture, that he considered to be the product of the people, so created by the people instead than by the aesthetic will of the architect. Since the 50s, Bazzoni started to use photography as an instrument of documentation and of civil commitment for the protection of the environment and the Italian cultural, natural, and productive heritage, documenting the radical transformations during the economic boom and the persistence of traditionally consolidated forms of the landscape. I will go a little bit fast in showing these photos, because then I want to devote the last part of the lecture to more recent and something more near to us. And so I will show some of the photos that Renato Bazzoni produced in these decades, after, during and after, and immediately after the economic boom. Here, for example, we have an image, very strong image. Of course, they're not images that are meant to be aesthetically based, but they're meant to be documentary and also neutral, not denuncia, not denuncia in inglese, complaint or complaint images, but neutral images that had to document the transformation, and sometimes also the impact of these transformations in the Italian territory. This is the highway that is linking Palermo and Catania in Sicily, that you see in the photo in this kind of completely wild countryside or land all around. And in a way emphasizing the contrast between modernization and the persistence of of the isolation of these territories, inner territories of Sicilian entroterra, of the Sicilian appunto inner regions. This is also Sicily. Bazzoni is also documenting a lot, for example, the exploitation of the coasts, of the marine, the waterfronts of Italy. Here, for example, we see this new mass touristic use and exploitation of the coast through the presence of these utilitari, of these cars, showing the massive use of the cost in terms of entertainment, let's say in entertainment, for entertainment purposes. Or we also have photos that detect the persistence of appunto ancient traditional shapes of the organization of the territory, the infrastructuring, for example, of the Padan countryside, of the Po region countryside, with these huge housings with this in this flatness of the Po region, with this big long streets leading to this to the buildings, and with the couples or filari of pioppi, no, or that are giving a rhythm to this say to this paths, to this infrastructuring of the territory. Okay, for example, here this is a couple of pioppi. In this case, there is a linear a lining of trees accompanying these paths, always leading to the house. Or, for example, here Pantelleria, so this very unique example of a landscape that is the product of nature and the artificial shaping, so the shaping of nature by man, aimed at making a very difficult and problematic territory productive. In this case, the agriculture in Pantelleria is acquiring very typical and unique shapes because of the both of the volcanic composition of the rocks that is giving this black color, and also because of the very windy and hot climate that makes agriculture come si dice, that makes yeah, according, thanks, si potrebbe dire, because of this, agriculture is actually in ricavata, oh my English, in these terraces. Okay, for example, we have the island of Pantelleria. I don't know if you ever visited it. Is characterized by the presence of these terraces and all the cultivations, all of the agriculture, for example, vineyards especially, and olive trees and capperi, are found in between these terraces in order to protect the cultivations from the wind. So it is the product of this sort of completely manufactured landscape in the middle between nature and artifice that is unique in the world. Also here we see another image of Pantelleria, and the Pantelleria was much photographed by Bazzoni to document this incredibly rich anthropographic, let's say we can say, landscape. Here we have the Capperi plantations, and on the background Punta Spadillo and the sea. Or okay, the marshlands between in the area around Ferrara, or the Navigli in Lombardy, the Valley of the Temples with the Colimbetra Gardens. These are all also important specific spots that identify with rescue in the following years. For example, the gardens of Colimbetra were restored with the funding of the Fondo Ambiente Italiano with more or less at the beginning of 2000s and open to the public. Or again, about regarding the exploitation of the coast. For example, here we see in Apulia in the 70s, the product of the touristicization of the coast with this huge hotel structure exactly facing the scogliera, the rock formations and the beach. So in a way destroying the natural environment. Although the photos doesn't want to convey this the photo wants only to document. It's focused actually on the documentation, or this sort of the imitation of vernacular architecture in San Vito Lo Capo, the new structures for tourism, for mass tourism that are raising everywhere in the Italian coast, and that are sometimes also talking something. Let's go into Gabriele Basilico. Gabriele Basilico maybe we can maybe we arrived at a point in which you heard talking about these photographers. Gabriele Basilico is very famous. He's one of the photographers who was linked also to the cultural background of architecture. Architects has been entertaining a lot of relationships with Basilico, and Basilico has been dialoguing with architects, and also his photographic interpretation of the cities has been dealing and has been also influenced in a way by this dialogue, this constant dialogue with architects. Anyway, we are going to focus especially on one work by Gabriele Basilico that is maybe the most iconic, the most renowned, although there are, of course, plenty of important works that he produced, and that there are many people who don't consider this to be the most important work, but it is quite important for us, and it's iconic. So I want to show you. That is issued in 1981. So we are at the beginning of the 80s. The subject is industrial archaeology in post-industrial Milanese periphery. Gabriele Basilico is strongly linked to his own city of origin, that is Milan, and he will always be investigating and exploring several aspects of the city of Milan and of the, let's say, the spirit of Milan. So before going into Basilico, I want to make a small premise about these very important interpreters of the Düsseldorf School of Photography that are Bernd and Hilla Beckel. Maybe you heard about Bern and Hillebecker. They are very famous, not only in the circles of photography, but also in the circle of art, plastic arts in general, visual art in general. And they are actually, the founders and principal animators of the Düsseldorf School of Photography. That is one of the most important centers from which contemporary photography has been spreading in the past few decades. If you consider that many of the important photographers active nowadays are coming, of course the German ones, are coming from the Düsseldorf School, we can understand the importance in shaping the photographic culture of the backers. Some of the names we can mention that were pupils of the backers in the Düsseldorf School of Photography, and that has been then making their own career and becoming some of the most important photographers still active nowadays are, for example, Andreas Gursky or Candida Hofer or Helge Resser and many others. Very important names. I don't know if you heard about them, but maybe you heard about Andreas Gursky, for instance. Anyway, the Beckers introduced this very interesting research. All the research on the Beckers was aimed at portraying structures of industrial buildings that were disseminated throughout the German territory, but not only, but European territory in general, and that were portrayed as sculptural objects in the landscape. Of course, the focus of the Becker's photos is not the environment, is not the relationship of the architectural object with its environs, but the architectural object in itself, considered actually as really as a sculpture, as an object. The architectural object in itself, with its shape, with its particular specific configuration that creates always different shapes and different variations on the same model. I'll show you. Okay, Bern and Hillebecker are best known for their extensive series of photographic images or typologies of industrial buildings and structures, often organized in grids. So their photos never goes one to one, but they're always organized in series, in photographic series that are exploring the different variations of a single kind of object, of a typology, or maybe also the different points of view of the same object. As the founders of what has come to be known as the Becker School or the Düsseldorf School, they influenced generations of documentary photographers and artists, as I said. So let's go to see very briefly, not that it's just a premise, because there is some Basilico took some of this cataloging series intentions from by the tradition of the Beckers, of course, contaminating it with many other references, as we will see. But I want you to have a look at this important, let's say, photos of the Beckers, because they give you an idea of where something of Basilico's gaze can stem from. This objectivity of the vision and this emphasis on the single object that is considered like it's something in the middle between art, photography, and sculpture. Of course, this vision shapes an attribution of value to these completely utilitarian structures that are attributing an aesthetical value to something that has not been shaped according to an aesthetic intention, but according to only to a certain use, to a certain functional necessity. Okay. So there is this cataloging, this objective view that is the view of the catalog, okay? This black and white frontal view organized in series. The object is always at the center of the images. The images are organized always in the same way. So there is not a variety, but a very strong and coherent organization of this catalog that is really coherent throughout the Becker's career. They are very powerful images, always organized according to the same. Of course, there is also here the idea of the aesthetic interest of these objects that are not actually, appunto, as I said, meant to have an aesthetic value, but that the Beckers are to which the Beckers are in the streamline of also modernist architects. You remember maybe that how Gropius valued industrial buildings, or how Le Corbusier introduced in his Vers une architecture book in the 20s images of American silos or industrial architectures that were altered in a sort of post-production process from the permanence of decorative elements in order to push their simple organization of volumes and to indicate them as potential models for a new architecture. So there is all this background in this, also present in the photos of the Beckers. And of course, we can't avoid to sometimes to, for example, to make some comparison, also because of the way in which they are portrayed, in which they are photographed, in which the photographs are taken. For example, if you see this element, maybe what comes to my mind at first is Gropius's own project for the Chicago Tribune. That was a very important competition in the 20s in Chicago. So the European view of the skyscraper that has been expressed in a very interesting way in the competition for the Chicago Tribune. I don't know if you have in mind that image, but maybe you can search it on Google. Or here, again, we can make the same discourses. Or here, this simplicity of volumes, the sphere and the bases that are, let's say, creating different versions of the very same typology that is pointing, let's say, the landscape with these strange objects and uncanny objects that have an aesthetic reason. So we arrived to the publication of Milano Ritratti di Fabbriche. That means portraits of industries, of industrial structures, that Basilico publishes in 1981, and in a moment in which things and the nature of the Italian landscape and of the view of the Italian landscape in photography is going throughout a change. The 70s, in fact, are a moment in which history could still be ideally thought as the pivot of the present. We can see it in the photos by Paolo Monti of Bologna. This is paradigmatic in this sense. So in the 70s, the historic centers still seem to constitute, albeit in extreme alarm, because they are menaced, they are threatened by modernization, of course, but still in a way resisting not only the symbolic, but also the strategic heart of the cities. In the words and photographs of Paolo Monti, an eager collaborator with the public body, there is still a hope for beauty, of regaining beauty through human will and intelligence, and desire to assert an enlightenment model of reason. We saw it in these spoiled visions of the historical fabric of Bologna that were cleaned by all the signs of a chaotic and scattered modernization that hadn't let's say, in harmony with the previous shape forms of the city. The years in which Basilico worked, so we are in the 80s, so on the contrary, the physical and even symbolic dimension of the cities changed until it became no longer measurable. The contemporary territory, a continuum of artifacts and ever-changing urban combinations, therefore requires the photographer to take new attention, which can no longer refer to a center that is neither real nor ideal, and which must necessarily be total, mobile, and above all, tolerant. So, for example, we can make a reminder to an exhibition that has been taking place in the United States in the 70s, the mid-70s, that is called New Topographics. In this new topographic exhibition in the mid-70s, the important shift in perception and important shift in the representation. So the revolution brought about by these small exhibitions that acquired a very great importance in the history of photography was that these photographers, I don't have images, but maybe if you are interested, I can suggest places where you can find them. These photographers were, for the first time, devoting their attention to spots, pieces or portions of landscapes that were not actually until that moment attributed any aesthetical value. For example, tract houses scattered in the American desert or at the border of the highways, or all the advertisement signs or gas line stops that were pointing and characterizing a lot the American landscape. So the vision shifted from the look, the search for the beauty of the nature, of the wilderness of the American, for example, of the American desert, if we can make we want to make an example, to these new forms of settlement that are actually chaotic, fragmented, not harmonic, and maybe that we don't have, that we still didn't have instruments to judge in aesthetical terms, at least not in the 70s, that for the first time acquire an importance as a subject of photographic representation. So the great clue of the new topography exhibition was why the public was astonished, because for the first time the public saw portrayed these elements, these everyday elements that didn't attribute any aesthetic value. So why to photograph them? Because there is a sense of giving value to what exists and to shape new aesthetical paradigms out of the new landscapes that are rising all around the cities, the outskirts of the cities, the countryside or the desert or whatever. In the American case, of course, the categories are different than in the Italian case. In the case of Basilico, we can make a similar discourse. We are at the beginning of the 80s, and of course, this shift brought about by new topographics has already begun to happen. And these abandoned industrial structures characterizing the outskirts of the Milanese city, of the city of Milan, are looked through a new interest, through a new gaze that attributes them an aesthetical value. Aesthetical value also because due to the fact that they are there, that they are characterizing the city landscape, and that are characterizing the peripheries, the outskirts of the city. So they are integral part, a huge part actually, of the city, because of course the city of Milan has been characterized bringing the attention to this abandoned structure, not only because they were valorized in terms of industrial archaeology, it was called industrial archaeology, but also because they needed to be, let's say, the great question was how to deal with this heritage, how to deal with these structures, what to do with them. If we had to destroy, it was necessary to destroy them, to dismiss them, to demolish them, or if they could be used for other purposes. So, of course, they are a big part of the building composition of the city. And Basilico lingers on these industrial elements in Ritratti di Fabbriche in a very interesting way that brings together the aesthetic of Sironi. Maybe you know Sironi, this important painter and sculptor of the fascist era, let's say, characterizing the Novecento movement in Milan, especially. If you go to the Museo del Novecento in Milan, in Piazza del Duomo, in the Arengario building by Muzio, you will find, I think that there is still an exhibition dedicated to Sironi. I don't know if it's still ongoing. And then you will find many works of Sironi also in the permanent collection of the Museo del Novecento. So he was one of the interpreters of the Novecento movement especially in Milan, but he is known especially for his interpretation of the industrial outskirts of the city, with these very high contrasted visions of metaphysical ascendance, and that are expressing the desolation of this post-industrial landscape. And Basilico so stems a little bit from this Milanese tradition, Sironian tradition, from the Beckers, of course, and the characterization of the industrial buildings by the Beckers as these interesting architectural, sculptural, artistic objects characterized by these functional, interesting shapes. And for this reason, he also chooses to use black and white. Basilico will use not only black and white, but I think mostly black and white during his work, during his life. And the difference with the Beckers, of course, is that Basilico portrays these structures not alone, not as isolated objects, but in the city, within the realm of the city, so within the landscape of the city, as you see, for example, here, caught in their relations, not only in their specific shape. So in what they create in terms of urban landscape. So he also includes in his view parts, big portions of the road, of the street, of the infrastructures, or also portions of also elements of, for example, urban furniture. In this case, the the element of lighting, of urban lighting, or scattered structures. And here the fulcrum of the composition is this vertical element, but and there are these two small people that are emphasizing, let's say, the desolation of this view that stems a lot from Sironi, but also from American photographers such as Thomas True. So there is a coexistence of different references in these views of urban periphery. Also here, the building is portrayed, but not alone, not in its isolation, but with a very big importance of these lightning elements or electricity lines that are this is projecting its shadow over the building, and and these two elements are actually framing this arch of the building between these two vertical elements that creates a sort of framework. Or there is also, I guess that there is also a echo of some of Pagano's photographs. I always thought that there is an echo in Basilica of some of Pagano photos in this abstraction, in this very strong contrast between lights and shadows that emphasize the lines of architecture and the simplicity of these volumes. There is the composition in this photo is very clear, it's very simple, it's made of these three strips, the building that is this you remember in Pagano there were these plaster facades that were lighted in a very strong way and contrasting a lot with the sky and the ground that were more contrasted, etc. So and this frontal view as well that is emphasizing the horizontal development of the building and the rhythm of the volume, of the rhythm of the windows, of these black holes that are emphasizing the surface of the facade. And also here, for example, there is this rhythm, there is this very high contrast between light and these very contrasted strong shadows. They are emphasizing the geometries, the simple geometries of the structures. Also here, there are echoes for me of Pagano. Here there are clearly echoes of the Beckers in these silos and the comparison between, let's say, these two very different objects, architectural objects. One that is circular, whose volume is circular and cylindrical, and the other one that is actually a sort of very simple come si dice, a very simple square. So I don't have the English word. Anyway, you understood. Two very geometrically clear figures dialoguing one with the other. Or here, so we also have a lot of echoes of the new topographics exhibition, for example, John Doe or other photographers. And the Beckers were also part of the new topographic exhibition, although they were the only one who were not American. Here it's quite clear the fact that we have the architecture seen from this frame of the barrier and the stone, and the masonry wall and the grid of this separation of this fence and the grid of these aerial structures of the electricity lines that are creating a sort of multi-stratified, multi-layered image of and there is this emphasis in the image of these different layers that are each one appearing as they was flattened layers superposing one to the other, etc. Okay, so now we arrive to the last and the more important part of the lecture, and that's why I propose to make a bigger break, and after which we are going to go through Giri's revolution, as I called it, pushing a little bit on a big shift in perception of landscape that Giri brought with his work. And it's 11:36, so we can see each other again at 5 minutes to noon, 5 minutes to 12. So in 20 minutes, 19 minutes now, yeah, 20 minutes, if it's okay for you, or 15 minutes maybe, 40, yeah, in 15 minutes more or less. Sorry, I didn't see that you could not hear. It lasted a lot?
No, it was just some small moments.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Maybe it was because of the connection. It's not perfect at home. So yeah, it needed to be. Anyway, if it happens again, can you talk? Because maybe I don't see the chat. Maybe if you talk, if you tell me, I can stop and wait that you can hear me again, or you can try.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, so okay, see you in 15 minutes. I stop the recording. Okay, no, sorry. Okay, so as I said, the second, the last and for me more important part of the lecture of today is facing a very specific case study that is the work of Luigi Ghirri, an important photographer that began to be active more or less in the 80s and continued to be active until his premature death, unfortunately. So he is not alive today, and we can't see what he would have produced if he would have be still alive. Anyway, he contributed to a sort of real revolution, a turn into the perception of the Italian landscape. And that's why I called this chapter, the chapter dedicated to Ghirri, to the rediscovering and reinventing the Italian landscape. It's a real rediscovering and reinventing, not because, in a way, Ghirri invents something that wasn't present in the Italian landscape. Of course, the landscape is there. Ghirri works with what exists, with what he sees, with what can be seen around us. He doesn't invent or deform or alter the image in any way. He uses analogical camera, and he works actually and exclusively with reality. What he invents is the new gaze through which reality can be observed, reality can be interpreted, reality can be represented. So it's more than a reinvention. I like this word rediscovering. It's a discovering of reality, because it's a way to discover in reality something that wasn't known, but that was there. The landscapes that Ghirri portrays were already there, but Ghirri had the sensibility to make them visible to us, to our eyes. So imagine when all this lecture is a little bit about this topic. Now there is this idea, this idea on the background of this lecture, and in general maybe a little bit of this course. That as you need new categories, new words to accompany the transformations of reality. Maybe when you, for example, philosophers create new concepts and new words to indicate these concepts that are new categories that we use to interpret reality. Also in photography, also in representation, painting, and then photography or whatever, or architecture, or let's say in the field of representing, the field of the image, we also need to shape always new concepts and new paradigms of vision through which we can interpret the world according to the sensibility of our epoch. The sensibility of our epoch that is due to the changes in our perception, and in the changes, of course, in what there is actually around us. So again, always the same story. Representations and reality goes hand in hand. Sometimes they follow a reality that is changing in front of us. Sometimes they are anticipating because they capture something in the sensibility of an epoch that is then leading to some changes or to some interpretations. So we need eventually, occasionally, regularly, these shifts, these new concepts, these new categories that are useful for us to interpret the new phenomena that surrounds us. Luigi Ghirri is important in the 80s for shaping really our gaze, what is for us the Italian landscape, what is worthy to be considered part of this landscape, what is not. Actually, the Great Revolution is that almost everything becomes worthy to be considered part of our landscape, and that's because it exists. So to give value to things only because they are there, they exist, and so maybe we can attribute some emotional value to the things that surrounds us, also the humble things, the stupid, the apparently banal things, scenes of our everyday lives. They're all worthy of attention by the photographer. In 1984, a very important exhibition and catalog is out that is called Viaggio in Italia, trip in Italy, travel in Italy. It is curated by Luigi Ghirri and other photographers with the introductory text by Arturo Carlo Quintavalle, who is a very important art historian that is also devoting a lot of attention to the history of photography, and with a text by Gianni Celati. Gianni Celati is a great friend of Luigi Ghirri and a writer and narrator that accompanied this experience, this incredibly rich experience of the Viaggio in Italia and of Ghirri's production in the following years. The exhibition is held in Bari, and it collects a big number of photos by different young photographers. They are a number of 300 photographs, more or less, that are say conceived as a trip throughout Italy. So and published by Il Quadrante. So the cover of the catalog of the exhibition is a very slight catalog, and now it's very rare. Like you can, let's say, pursue this catalog for I think 1,000 euro or 800 euro, something like that, because it has become really a very important stone in come si dice, a very important turning point in the history of photography. And the cover is this map, this simple map of Italy that is, and it is considered as a travel, as a sort of emotional travel throughout the places of Italy. I would like to read you two quotations by Luigi Ghirri. Luigi Ghirri has an interesting way of expressing his approach to photography, also in text, because he says he has been involved in a huge editorial activity. He has been working with several publishing houses, and he has been working as well with several magazines. So he is a photographer who has been devoting his activities, photographic activities, not only to his own personal research, artistic research, but also in collaborations with publishers, with editorial endeavors that has been also enriching his production in a way. These quotations are interesting to express the shift in paradigm that I was trying to explain before. So Luigi Ghirri says that the landscape is not where nature ends and the artificial begins, but it is an area of passage, not geographically delimitable, but more a place of our time, our epochal figure. In Italian it is la nostra cifra epocale, the figure that expresses our times more than anything else, more than any other figure, because landscape is not this, as is really poetically expressed and very efficaciously, effectively, sorry, expressed and also poetically expressed, is not where nature ends and the artificial begins. So it is not the sea and the mountains instead than the cities. It is this area of passage. It is the way we look at things. It is not a geographical place that is delimitable in the geographical terms. Deals with our sensibility, something that deals with our emotional attitude towards our epoch, the way we look at our world. And he says also in another text, there is a line from Shakespeare that goes like this. Ironically, having such a good view and going down a dead end. So we can see so good, we can see so sharply, but we don't see exactly where we are going. We go to a dead end. We don't see the escape. This is a metaphor that Giri uses. So I think he says he photographs our situation well. Yes, today there is a risk of reaching a point of disappearance to an insane gaze due to an excess of visibility. Photography must then attempt to break through the perceptive wall that accompanies us. The world from habitable and knowable has suddenly become unknown. I think that this quotation is so rich of meanings that we can stay a long time to analyze it. But I want to do it really briefly, just to point out some expressions that we can find here. That is, for example, this point of disappearance, a moment in which the habitable and the knowable, so what is familiar for us has suddenly become unknown. Why what is familiar can become unknown to our own, to ourselves, to our own vision, because we don't have the categories, the interpretative categories to see it, to give it value, to understand it, to comprehend it. So the aim and the role, the very important responsibilities of who produces images in an epoch of a sort of excess of visibility, an excess of production of images, is to break this perceptive wall that avoid us to identify ourselves in our own environment, in the own world in which we live, in which we move. So to try to see with fresh eyes, you know what I mean? Let's say what we see is not anymore understandable, so we need a new images among the plenty of images that we produce, the images that break this wall of visibility, this perceptive wall, and that allows us to finally identify, to comprehend things that we are not used to comprehend. So let's go to see some images from Viaggio in Italia, from this catalog, from this exhibition of 300 photos. I selected some of them, some famous ones. Some of them are by Luigi Ghirri, some of them are by other photographers. But they all talk about a fresh view of Italian landscapes, both of places of the peninsula that are part of that of that topoi of the beauties of Italy, the famous and consolidated, let's say, beauties of Italy. For example, in this case, the Capri Faraglioni, no? We are in Capri. This is a very famous spot, panoramic spot, in which the Faraglioni of Capri are visible from the top. And that sea, so both these famous places, let's say famous spots, famous touristic spots, and completely any places, banal places that weren't considered worthy of attention until that moment. Think again at new topographics, what I told you about new topographics in the 70s. this new attempt by American photographers to portray places that had been not worthy of attention until that moment. So both of these, both famous places and not famous places, with fresh eyes, with a new gaze, a gaze that is more pushing on the emotional content of the image than on the paradigm and standardized image conveyed by the photographic tradition, for example, of Alinari brothers. Okay, so if the vision is shaped, the vision of some spots, the famous spots of Italy, are shaped by certain traditional image of photography that stems from pictorialism and from painting tradition, in particular, from perspective view, etc., and especially from painting in general. Now photography is acquiring slowly its own specific language. Of course, there has been always a specific language of photography. I'm simplifying in this case, but there is a complete detachment of what photography can do that is linked to the perceptive, the emotional perception of places by the people. For example, here we have, similarly then what it happens with the Impressionists, and we saw it in the first lecture, the thematization of the gaze. We don't have anymore the touristic spot, the famous spot in itself and portrayed for itself and by itself, the Faraglioni of Capri, but we see the Faraglioni of Capri through a fence of a panoramic point of observation and a telescope that allows you, if you put the coin into it, to see from a close-up point of view the composition of the rocks and the Faraglioni of Capri. So this is a thematization of the gaze. Here, the subject is not the Faraglioni of Capri, but is the subject who observes the Faraglioni of Capri. Is the same Italian landscape that is inserted into a wider, broader reflection over its touristicization, its attribution of value, its being a portion of a sequence of important touristic spots. So there are a lot of levels of reading in these images, but the very subject of the image is the subject who is observing, and the same act of the observation, and not the object itself of the observation, that is the Faraglioni. Also here, in the Alpe di Siusi near Bozen, in this very famous photo, we are meant to identify ourselves. The observer of the photography is meant to identify emotionally with the scene, with this couple of old people, this old couple, let's say, that is walking in this meadow overlooking the Dolomites, the Alpe di Siusi, and we see them from behind. The subject of the photo, of course, is not only them, because they are in the right part of the image, but they actually are fundamental to structure the dynamic of this photo, the way it works on the observer, and the feeling that it conveys on the observer, because the observer is feeling, let's say, is asked to be emotionally involved in this in the experience that this couple is making of the landscape, that is not only involving the landscape in itself and its physical appearance, but is also involving the relationship between them, the fact that they are holding their hands, the fact that they maybe are walking in a place in which that they know so well, in which they have so many memories, to which they are affectively linked. And so there are all these elements and all these levels in these images, and not only a documentation of the landscape, neither only an aesthetical appreciation of the landscape. The landscape is always seen through the presence that can be direct or indirect of man, of the human presence. They are human photographs, narrative photographs, talking about something happening, an event taking place, lives, a collective or individual life taking place in the image. And the landscape is exactly this relation. You know what Giri said in the initial quotation, that landscape is our epochal figure. It's not only a geographical category. It's something that is more linked to time, to emotion, to memory, to sedimentation, to human lives, to human experiences. Also here we have, these are all photos that are part of the exhibition of Viaggio in Italia. Here, for example, between these two palms and this very simple composition of the images in 4 horizontal strips, the street, the meadow, the sea, and the sky, we have these 2 human figures over this bench, always seen from behind, but they are not anymore the impersonal presences of the photographs of Alinari brothers, for example, or many others, for example, that we saw in this lecture, but they are human presences that are actually to which the whole image is dedicated. They are very small in the image, but they are the center, geometrical, more or less the center. The composition of the image is meant to focus our attention on them, on the fact that they are looking this landscape. We see this landscape through their eyes. We feel involved in the scene they are living. We seem to be part of this conversation taking place in this bench in front of this horizontal line of the sea. So suddenly in these photographs of Viaggio in Italia, another country materializes, another Italian country materializes, made up of marginal places, asphalt strips, deserted cities, beaches, abandoned houses, provincial roads, uncultivated gardens, metal fences, bars, deserted offices. We discovered the existence of those places that we happen to see, to use the words by Gianni Celati, when we take the wrong road, or are lost or tired, or in the stops of travel, or on empty days, in the afternoons when you don't know where to take refuge. It is very poetic, this explanation of what this could be described as being the very subject of these photos. The very subject of these photos are the places that you happen to meet when you take the wrong road, when you're out of your street, when you're out of your road, not the places that you are meant to see, to be paying attention to, but the places that you encounter during the travel of life, and that seem arbitrary, but that are actually the real, what exists, the real environment in which human lives take place. Okay, so there is a very shift in the concept of what is landscape, what is Italian landscape, that is much larger than before. If before the concept of landscape was limited to some specific subjects, chosen, selected subjects, now everything can be worthy of being considered landscape, because what gives landscape its what assures, guarantee to landscape its existence? The people who look at it, the people who are experiencing it. That's why in all Giri's photos, although they are void of people, they don't present the human presence, they're always talking about the human presence. They're always talking about a feeling that is deposited on the landscapes. These are other photos taken by Viaggio in Italia. For example, in this case, we have Olivo Barbieri. He was kind of young in the beginning of the 80s when he shot the photos that were included in Viaggio in Italia, but he's still active. So we will see at the end of the lecture some updatings about his works. Here we see this uncanny lighting that is depicting a very topic, very classical place of an Italian historical city, a place that is similar to the many porches of the Emilian cities that Paolo Monti depicted in his own photographs, but in a very different way, with a very different sensibility. Here we have the lights of the night, of the evening, that are projecting strange drawings on the pavement. We have this soccer game that is again talking about the life that during the day has been populating this now empty porch that is seems to be prepared for the scene of an assassination, something that is also talking about a narrative attitude toward places, something that has been happening before and that is not happening anymore, like the soccer game, or that is maybe still to be happening, still to happen in the future, and that is and that we are waiting for. Or in this case, for example, here we have a very apparently a scene made of nothing, apparently just a group of these cucumbers in this let's say in this kind of wood landscape in Follonica, with the presence, again, the presence of man only evoked without the real direct presence of man. And this every day, this a little uncanny and apparently banal spots that are considered to be worthy of an aesthetic attribution of value. Or Vincenzo Castella, who is going to be to become very famous for his city view, for example, from the top. I don't know if you saw the many photographs he showed of the city of Milan from an aerial view, or of Naples, of the Gulf of Naples, of the Vesuvio, etc. In this case, we have again the scene of an abandonment, the sort of derelict scene of a place that we used to associate to a huge presence of people. Okay, we are in a beach in Rimini with the capanne, no? the small shelters of the beach, and but there is no one because the weather is bad, and there is this fog, this uncanny fog with which is altering and come si dice? Yeah, altering the perception of this place, and that is giving a view of this spot that is actually very different from the usual one. Okay, so there is a search for views and visions that are not the already known, that are not the one that we already use to associate to places. A background vision, something that is a rediscovering, this idea of the rediscovering that I put in the title, okay? So a place that is there, but that we are not used to see like that, so that we rediscover through the eyes of the photographer, with this dereliction, with this dirty presence of the tourist, of the exploitation of the beach during the day, in this empty road. Or Giovanni Chiaramonte, who is still active now in these days, and that also participated with some of his photographs to Viaggio in Italia. Or in this one, for example, again we have a scene that, for example, in this one we have a view of the mountain that is, let's say, located. Yeah, we can put it in the great tradition of photographs of the mountain, but of course in a very different way, because we don't have anymore, let's say, this monumental view of Vittorio Sella, of the black and white of the rocks, that is more lenticular, the lenticular vision of Vittorio Sella, but we have an atmospheric view, something that is creating the emotional feeling of the mountain emerging from this fog. So something linked to a specific moment of light that is always been the aim of Chiaramonte's research. In this case, for example, the presence of the monumental heritage and legacy of Italy, of the Italian landscape, but not anymore portrayed for itself in its monumental presence, but as a background of a soccer play, of an improvised soccer play of some guys here in this open air soccer field, football field, and with this big tower that is caught in its degradation of its architecture, in which natural, let's say, vegetation is gradually taking advantage, let's say, over the stones that are composing the structure, and that is at the center of the image, but yes, actually considered a background to the scene, to the event that is happening in the foreground. Or Vittore Fossati. Vittore Fossati will be a famous interpreter, for example, of gardens. He will photograph a lot gardens and open air scenes. In this case, we have this interesting, let's say, portrait of a very banal street in the countryside near Alessandria that is characterized by the presence, the sudden presence of the rainbow that is transfigurating, of course, this banal scene that is not anymore the banal scene that it used to be, but it's the scenery of a miracle, of something sort of extraordinary, an extraordinary atmospheric event. Or in this case, Mario Cresci. Mario Cresci has worked a lot in Matera, in which he photographed the population of the Sassi and also the caves around Matera. But in this case, he is near Potenza. There is this house that is again transfiguring something so banal, so elementary, a very simple facade of a house that, through this light that seems to be anticipating a storm, is charged with something of a mystical, or you can see the Matera photo. Ah no, what do you mean by Matera's photo? What do you see now, Maria Luz? You can see the Stigliano Potenza photo by Mario Cresci with the house in the center. Ah, the Matera one. Yeah, I didn't put them. It's only, I was explaining that he worked a lot on Matera. Okay, the one on Rimini, you saw it. Ah, okay. So after Rimini, there was Chiaramonte, and the two by Chiaramonte, and then Vittore Fossati, and then Mario Cresci. I hope you saw all of them. Yeah, the Matera ones, I only mentioned them because it's a huge part of Mario Cresci's work, but of course we can't focus on each part of Mario Cresci's work. There are some problem of connection. Okay, let's go on. So again, Mario Cresci. So there is always this attempt to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. Okay, that is typical of the research conducted in Viaggio in Italia. That is a new way of looking at landscapes, trying to detect the extraordinary in ordinary places, in places that are not special for some reason. Another important step in Ghiri's career that I want to mention is the Lotus Documents volume that he worked on, that he curated in 1989, called Italian Landscape. Ghiri considers this book, although it is not his first book, of course, but he considers to be his first author book, the first book he authored, as not only as a photographer, but also as an author of the book, because he conceived the book from scratch, charged by Pierluigi Nicolini, who was the director and is still the director of Lotus International, to produce this Lotus Documents volume on the Italian landscape. So he collected in this volume a great part, a huge part of his previous research, photographic research on the Italian landscape. And he talked about this work in these terms. This work on the Italian landscape, I would like it to appear a little like an imprecise cartography without cardinal points, which concerns more the perception of a place than its cataloging or description. geography. Itineraries are not marked and precise, but obey the strange tangles of seeing. Because seeing is understanding, judging, transforming, imagining, forgetting and forgetting oneself, being or disappearing. So he uses this last sentence, this last quotation by Paul Éluard, the poet, in order to express this role, this responsibility that the photographer, in his opinion, has got, that is to construct this new attempt, a sort of imprecise cartography that is an attempt, an exploration of an attempt to comprehend reality, the reality that is so much changed that we cannot recognize itself anymore. So with not cardinal points, it's not a scientific operation. It's something that deals with the perception of a place and not with the description or with the cataloging or with the scientific survey, nothing like that. Only a sentimental geography. So I show you a little bit fastly because we already talked about some themes, some subjects. These photos, again, we are in Capri here and it is included in Italian landscape, but here we don't have any more the telescope, but we have the people looking. So really, the Capri Faraglioni is not anymore, actually quite not in the image, because we see only a portion, a very small fragment of its last side, but because the subject of the image are the people looking and the familiar relationship that bounds them while looking, while caught in a moment of relaxation, of admiration of the landscape, of contemplation, and so in which they talk intimately one to each other, and the grandma stays a little bit on the side, and the mother, we can imagine that this is the mother talking to his two childs. So we are focusing on the human relationships between the figures, and they are the mediators for us, that are the public, to look at this landscape. So the landscape is not actually for itself, let's say, standing for itself, but because it is observed by them. Or here, for example, a banal facade of a house that is caught because there is this order, this geometrical tripartition of elements that stuns the attention of the photographer. So he tried to look at normal, ordinary things as they are charged with some significance, because this is an emotional significance, an affective significance. Or here again, there are many photos that are talking about the metaphor of photography. So in this case, we have something like maybe a construction site that we see through this fence, and there is this square window, this square opening in the fence that allows us to cut a hole into the veil of understanding. So photography, through cutting a portion, a frame from reality, allows to cut this wall of incomprehension that that exists between us, between our perception and reality. So this is, of course, a great metaphor of photography, as much as this one, in which there is this frame that allows to cut a portion of reality that acquires a meaning and that becomes comprehensible for us, that becomes significant, meaningful, only because it is cutted by this frame. Or these photos in which there is the idea of a promenade, of a path that you are. Of course, there is also some echo of the Chirico metaphysical paintings, of course, in all, say, the visual culture of Luigi Ghiri. There are plenty of references also of painting, of course, but also of American photography, as we will see. Anyway, in this case, we have this idea of again, it seems that we, the photographer, and we are, as the photographer, percurring this path, and the landscape is gradually opening in front of us while we are walking. So it's not already, let's say, exposed in front of us, but we are conquering its comprehension in its gradual It's gradual opening through our walk, through our changing perspective. Also here, the Colosseum is not the center of the image as it would be in the Alinari view, but we are the person that is kind of spying the man looking in this garden, and we are overcoming this cespuglio, this tree or I don't know, bush, in order to move around this garden and gain always different views of the monument. And there is, of course, a lot of influence of the observation of the American photographers. Geary explicitly explains this, that the fact that the American photography has been very important to him in shaping also this view of the Italian landscape, made of these scattered places along the streets, along the highways at night, with these very pop, strange, uncanny colors of lightings, or the superposition between incongruous modernity and the permanence of the shapes of tradition. Okay, this is always the superposition of different times of modernity and something already there. Another quotation by Ghirri: De Sica, Rossellini, Fellini, Antonioni, they are all movie directors. They too forget the paths of the Tuscan countryside, the Venetian streets, the ancient stones of the Appia Antica, so all the topoi of the Italian typical representations, and tell about the gasometers behind the Roman Forum, the petrol stations along the country roads, the advertising billboards in the suburbs. They were not changes in the landscape, but changes in life. In American photography, I found that it talked about the same things. It is difficult for me to say which of these moments struck me most. The analogy was profound, the motive and inspiration similar. Understand, transcribe, tell about our visible horizon, talk about what exists. Paradoxically, American photography, no less than Antonioni's Red Desert and Fellini's La Strada, invites us to take up the challenge of contemporaneity and the present. It teaches us to build our identity, that is inside and outside of us, in a singular synthesis of the external and internal world. And in this statute of necessity for the image, it seemed to me that I was also reading about ethical values, about a project that was not just about representation, but also about living again. So in American photographers can be also seen in the inquiry in the research on the Po region that Ghirri conducted during his life. He was originary of Emilia, and he many times portrayed the countryside around the Po region with this flatness and with its immense horizon that echoes in a way the immense horizon of the American desert. So there is a superposition of landscape topoi. Or here, for example, that in which these lines of the landscape, of the rogge, of the canals are structuring the images and emphasizing this apparently unending horizontal line of the horizon, separating the earth and the sky. Also here, in which the horizon loses itself in the fog, or here in which it is framed by these lines of trees, etc. So many photos that are working on this idea, or on these frames that are behind, say, frame these horizons, etc. Or on this, on the disappearing of architectural matter, of the material, let's say, of the mineral composition of architecture, thanks to this light transfiguration. This is Venice. This is, I guess, one of the cities in the Po region. I don't remember exactly. Or the scattered elements that construct, that build inedited, unusual landscapes in these ephemeral landscapes in the beaches, for example. These photos made of in which the landscape is constituted. The sea is only a very small strip in the background, but then we have these scattered elements, this white plaster house in the foreground, and the people going out of the beach. or this one that is very interesting because this is all constructed in the relation of these ephemeral elements of this play, of these games. Okay, we can go. You see here the event, the narration present in the photos. And then the relation, and then we close Ghirri with this, the relationship with architecture that is very, very interesting because it expresses itself especially in the first two charges that commitments, how do you say, that Ghirri is charged with by Lotus International. We are at the beginning of the 80s. For example, especially in the first stance for this issue of the magazine, that is Funerary Lotus, the issue number 38, we are in 1983, in which Ghirri is charged by Pierluigi Nicolin to photograph two buildings, two very important buildings. The Tomba Brion by Carlo Scarpa in San Vito di Altivole, realized at the end of the 60s and between the end of the 60s and the end of the 70s, and the Cimitero di San Cataldo in Modena by Aldo Rossi. These two architectural charges will bring also a big revolution in the architectural photography. And now I will tell you why showing you the photos. This is the Tomba Brion in San Vito di Altivole, and these are Ghirri's photos in Lotus, in which we see this idea of the hortus conclusus, no? the enclosed garden of the Tomba Brion, which dialogue with the vegetation and with the elements of the landscape all around. For example, with the church in the background, with the mountains in the background. So the idea, we will see it still better in Aldo Rossi's case, in the Cimitero di Cemetery of Modena case study. The idea is that the photograph, of course, Tomba Brion is very useful in this case because it's constituency that is, let's say, it's a very quality of the project allows Ghirri to enlarge his vision of architecture and not concentrating only on the portions of the building in themselves, but on the garden and on the relationship with the environs. The idea is therefore, first of all, is to create a photographic essay that is independent to the text running parallelly, parallelly in the magazine. So there are texts of critics and historians and of the architects, but at the same time, the images are not meant to be descriptive or a sort of iconographic apparatus of the text. They are an independent essay. They are an independent discourse running parallelly to the one of the critic texts. And the architecture is never caught in itself for some simple architectural details or for simple architectural shapes, as it happened in the very tradition of architectural photography. Imagine, like, I don't know, Ezra Stoll, when in the photo of buildings by Mies van der Rohe or by Schindler or by Saarinen, etc. The very famous photos of these buildings. And here we see this also the paging, you know, the layout of the pages going into this direction. This path, this architectural path, something that is involving a movement, a perception, an experience of the building as a phenomenological element, something that goes together with the environment, that is caught in the special moment of the reflection of the water, of a certain characterization of the sky, and the relationship with the garden, of course, and the open space, or of the shadows produced by the position of the sun over the walls. That will be a theme that Guido Guidi, another important photographer, will take again and will explore a lot. Okay, so these are other images of these photos by Luigi Ghirri. So in which we can see very well all what the thing we commented. Okay, so This selection of photographs of the Modena Cemetery are published under the title The Cube and the Portico in this issue of Lotus, then issue 38, presented as a proper photographic essay rather than as a mere iconographic complement to the article. The author is Luigi Ghirri, and this is his first commission in the field of architectural photography. Let's go into this work. The cemetery of San Cataldo, maybe you know the project. This is a plan of the master plan of the project. This is the existing cemetery, and this is the new cemetery that Aldo Rossi designed, that has been never completed, but that has been partially realized. So you can go to visit it. In the outskirts of Modena, in the countryside, let's say, in the outskirts of Modena, these photographs are introducing actually a completely new paradigm in the architectural photography. Exactly, yeah, the opposite of, as I said, as Ross Soller was doing with architectural photography, that was actually focusing really on the shape of architectures, because they were aimed at describing architecture for its perfection, for the beauty of its shapes, for the importance of, let's say, for the innovation of its technical solutions, etc. Now we have architecture completely immersed in the environment. This is a very important shift that we really have to understand well. These photos are clear in this sense. We see the block of one of the portions of the cemetery of Aldo Rossi completely, let's say, portrayed in the back of a meadow, of a sort of abandoned meadow with scattered elements all around. So there is a phenomenologic vision. Here we see it actually from the window of a car that is moving. In the first place we see a banal housing block, housing unit, and we see the block of the cemetery through the windows of the car that is moving. So what is Ghirri trying to say? Ghirri is trying to say that architecture is always immersed in a bigger picture, in a bigger environment, in a bigger frame. It is not it is never seen as in traditional architectural photography, in its perfection, in its frontal view, etc. It is perceived within the environment. When you visit an architecture, you approach it, and in this approachment you have of it a very, very different views that are always merged with many other stratifications of landscape, of presences, more ancient, maybe more modern, maybe contemporary, let's say. And not only because, okay, architecture is part of this bigger picture, and the bigger picture is not only made by other architectural presences or the trees or the urban furniture and what is around it, but also by the environmental condition in which you perceive it. So maybe if it is a very foggy day or a very cloudy day or a very sunny day, architecture will be perceived in a completely different way, according to the moment, to the very moment in which you experience it. So Ghirri is putting architecture into time, into the passing of time, something that Aldo Rossi didn't understand at first glance. So at the beginning, he wasn't so happy about the photographs published on Lotus magazine about the service made by Luigi Ghirri, because he thought, okay, but so my architecture is not valorized, it's not valued as the main thing, the main subject of the photo. It is always seen as it was any presence in a bigger picture. Okay, so, and then we always have this narrative composition of the image, the fact that you approach the building in this promenade, and you the building itself is crossed by landscape. For example, here in this paging of the magazine, it's very interesting the way, for example, you frame the landscape from the building in different ways, and you frame, for example, the sky from the top of the building, because this particular part of this element, of course, is explored from the exterior, but also from the interior. So it's always an exploration of this relationship between inside and outside, the building and the landscape, and their mutual intertwinings, their mutual dialogue. For example, here it is very powerful, the way in which here you see it in black and white, but I have the now I will arrive to the color picture, in which from the inside you Giri frame with these two square window, the sky and the ground, the green meadow in the ground. So there is always this twofold operation of approaching the building from the exterior and then approaching the landscape from the interior of the building, and the vision is always in movement, it's always a changing, it's never fixed, it's never static, and it's never interested only to architecture in itself, but in its relationship with the environs. The result is something completely new, where Aldo Rossi's unfinished work appears in unprecedented views taken from the windows of the car, contending the space of the frame with untamed grasslands, emerging from the fresh snow, framing meaningful portions of sky and horizon. From this dialogue, and here lies the reason of its emblematic value, a new way of looking at architecture has emerged, addressed at unveiling its meteorological substance, its temporality, inconstancy, and after all, its inescapable pertinence to a specific site. It stands, therefore, as an exemplary testimony of how much the act of looking lays at the origin of architecture and the territory, conceived as complex cultural and stratified constructions, and considered in relation to contradictory aspects and apories of contemporary landscape. So this is maybe the manifesto of this view. This was not published on Lotus issue, but it was maybe the most famous, the one that will become more famous photo by Ghirri of the cemetery of Modena, in which the architecture is only a very small part of a composition in which this snowy landscape is predominant. So the very composition of, say, the very environmental nature of the landscape in this precise moment is the center of the image, and not architecture as a composition, for maybe as a formal fact, but architecture as a fact that is part of the events of life, that is part of a phenomenological composition of our environment. So Camillo, what do you say? It's interesting that now in the cemetery, the feeling is very different, as there is maintenance for the grasslands, and now there are other buildings. Very same photographs are not possible to achieve. Of course, in any case, these photographs are photographs that are dating to the 80s. So you will never have nowadays the same exact view. And so they are so important for us in this case to as being symptomatic and the very beginning of this shift in the view of architecture as part of the environment, that is very useful for us architects to have, because of course we have to be aware of the fact that architecture is not an isolated fact, but it is a fact in the context, in the environment, that is dialoguing with so many things. And of course, also a document of a situation, of a condition that will not be anymore the same, any longer the same, because of course everything is always changing, and the stratification is always enriching itself of new elements. Okay, let's go on. The night view. Ghirri is joking on the fact that we are always looking in the most unbelievable ways this architecture, and so it is a sort of de-idealization of architecture and landscape, but something that deals with really a phenomenological view. It's almost a philosophical stance. As is well known, he says, there is a path that begins with the design, goes through the stages we know well, and ends in the construction of the building. In the end, the artifact is authenticated by photography. At the end of this journey, we have a kind of stereotype of the architectural image, very similar to a still life, but performed in the outside world. Although these still lifes often seem to harness and capture the eye for the singular and distinct precision, they also remind me a little of the photograph of a model of the building rather than the architecture. So he is struggling toward, against the stereotype of the architectural image that would be more similar to a still life or to a model than to reality itself, because reality, he is saying, is much more complex than a single view of architecture can convey. And architecture is part that he wants or that he doesn't want, and the architect is aware or not, this is part of this environment, and we will be subject to changes, to transformation, to decay, to time. Okay. So then you have time to see these photos with all your calm. I will give you the slides. I go through them fastly. This is the photo that I showed you before in black and white on the pages of Lotus, while these are the original ones in colors. And we arrive, this is the one of the sky, that seems a work by Turel in a way. And at the end, okay, the original color one of the vision from the window of the car, that is really astonishing in terms of anticipation of new categories of vision. Yeah. So I want to close very, very fastly with, and anticipating the next lecture, with some of the, as I told, some of the achievement of in the last decades of the work by Olivo Barbieri that I entitled Manufactured Altered Landscape. So which is the difference? The difference is that while Ghirri has always has discovered, let's say, extraordinary things in the ordinary, so he only worked always with reality in itself. Olivo Barbieri is part of a generation of artists and of photographers who began to to play with reality and to work on the idea of distorting reality, of altering reality through the mean of photography. In a way, what Giacomelli did with the typographic technique that he pushed on the expressionist image, the expressionist value of the image, Olivo Barbieri does it with digital manipulation of the image. And that it will be a tendency, as we will see, a very strong tendency of our epoch. It seemed to me, he says, that no one up to that moment had photographed the night in color. The background, both cinematographic and photographic, was all in black and white. I was also interested in imagining the color of the future. So soon I started using colors that seemed synthetic and electronic. I started printing the photographs with the highlights burned out, in which there were light parts that were not legible. I did it in years when the photograph had not to be legible in all its parts. I was often considered some kind of heretic. So let's look at these photos very, very fastly. This is, of course, the Colosseum and the area around, in which there is a clear evocation of the Friedrich, romantic picture of the man, of the wanderer looking, dominating the view of the Alps. But there is the manipulation, a manipulation of the lighting, a manipulation of reality in order to create an augmented reality, what we now would call an augmented reality, something that is not actually only extracting the extraordinary from the ordinary, but that is pushing on a sort of altered view of reality. And this will be always more and more visible in his images. Here we are still in the same transfiguration that we saw in the Ghirri's image of Venice. But if we go on, we will see this always this manipulation and this uncanny vision that will merge reality and fiction in a way. until we arrive to a vision that is this is a big work on Italian and international cities that is called the name was site specific. This is Rome in particular, but he did this work on several cities in which architectures themselves and the important places in the cities that are immediately recognizable are not anymore. Let's say they are blurred. Their appearance they are taken from an aerial view, and they are blurred. Their volumes are blurred in order to convey this sense of maybe a model, maybe a recreation, a reproduction, something that we are not sure that are a view of the real city, of the real thing, and that they are not reconstructions of models of the cities themselves. So there is this ambiguity between the reality and its fake, and it's a possible recreation of it, a possible you see, a simplified view or consumeristic view of reality, that the people are so small that you really don't understand if they are real or if they are small puppets put in a model of the Colosseum, and this blurring mix completely the vision in order to create this ambiguity. And this is the Eur, always in Rome, Monza, the mall bringing to the Villa Reale, again the cemetery of Modena. Look at how the vision has changed, and that is conveying this sense of ambiguity. Siena. I fast because I only wanted to introduce this idea of the manipulation of the image that is introducing a new paradigm in after Ghirri's vision. So next lecture I will go into international scenery and explore a little bit this idea of altered manufactured landscapes. Okay, so yeah, I will give you the possibility with your own time to look through these photos. You see this alteration and this modification, this manipulation of the images in order to create something that is not anymore actually recognizable as the image. Of course, there is a basis that is the photo of reality, but then this image is completely manipulated in order to create something else. So I close the lecture with this sentence, with this quotation by Jean-Christophe Bailly, who is a theoretician, a French theoretician, and dramaturgic writer, but he worked a lot actually with landscape and with photography as well. He says, what we feel passing through the landscapes that surrounds us is that the discrepancy between what we used to consider their legitimate representation and what they are actually becoming has grown, making room for an expectation of new images that would not be so much realistic as simply in keeping with the fundamental tone of the age. So what does Jean-Christophe Bailly want to say with this? And this could be also the beginning of the next lecture. He wants to say that again, we are in a situation a little bit similar to what Basilico was in. Do you remember when in the 80s there were not anymore, or Ghirri's also, in the 80s there were not anymore the instruments, the categories to interpret the reality and the big transformation we impacted on reality. And nowadays we are a little bit in a similar moment. So there is a discrepancy between what we used to consider the legitimate representation of things and the things as they have become in these last few decades. This huge transformation that has really affected our environment, our landscapes in the last few decades, much more than in the 80s actually, that are making room for an expectation of new images. So in a way, we are involved in the present moment in a discourse in the need to create the images that will be able, as Ghirri's images has been able to interpret the new transformations of the territory in the 80s, to interpret what we have around, what we are living in, the environment in which we are living, the world in which we are living in. So this It's only, let's say, yeah, a way to introduce the topic of the next lecture, which will be a little bit more focusing on this aspect of what has been doing in the last has been done in the last few decades, and is actually been done in these years in order to shape the categories of vision that can help us to comprehend, to interpret, to understand our present world. And that was the last slide, and I opened the video, and I just show you the bibliography. That is a very short article by Luigi Ghirri himself, published on Lotus number 52, that I will put on Weebip. And of course, there would be a lot of bibliography to indicate. This is not mandatory, of course. It's only an indication. In this site that I put on in the slide, you will find the whole volume of Paesaggio Italiano digitalized, and on this site you will find all Ghirri's books digitalized. So it is a very good, very beautiful website in which you can really go through the whole production of books, of photographic books by Luigi Ghirri. And then, of course, there are two issues of Lotus that I would like in particular to indicate. One devoted to photographs like Olivo Barbieri or Paolo Rosselli or Guido Guidi, Giovanni Chiaramonte, recent photographers, contemporary photographers, issued in 2006, and another one more recent, issued in 2017, that is dealing with international photographers at the basis of this manufacturing altered landscape that we will dealing with in the next lecture. So just now give the word to you in case you will like to tell something, and then we have to stop. Everything clear? Did you know these photographers? Did you know some of them? I'm really open to comments by you if you wish, or else we can close. So I wait some minutes because of course you have to elaborate. I will send the slides. Okay, for you it was almost all new. Okay, yeah, I could imagine, because of course it's a very, let's say, it's a part of the course that I decided to devote to this, because I think it could be interesting to look at the transformations, to look at landscape also through the transformation of the gaze, because for architecture the impact of Ghirri's work has been really strong, and there have been also books, studies, essays dedicated to this, because it has been kind of revolutionary also for the architectural culture. So it didn't impact only on photographic culture, but also on architecture and landscape culture, because we couldn't anymore conceive landscape in the same way after Ghirri, because he contributed so much to enlarge enlarge our category of what is landscape and what could be considered worthy of aesthetical appreciation. And maybe he gave us also the instruments, the possibility to say, visual instruments to look at things in a different way. Of course, we couldn't look at things in the same way as before. That is very interesting. So because it tells a lot about how we architects, and we have a great responsibility to look at things and to try to interpret things at the light of our present categories, in order not to convey not updated images of what is considered to be. Everything is shaped by cultural and also the way we intervene and we operate in the world is shaped by cultural constructs. No, we talked a lot about it in the first lecture, and these are cultural constructs, or the product of cultural constructs. And so that's why we have to pay a lot of attention to these things, because they allows us to follow the historical evolution of cultural construct and to place ourselves in our own cultural constructs and maybe to shape new cultural constructs, because your generation have the responsibility to shape new cultural constructs, new models of vision, new interpretations of what we see, of what we have around us. So Camilo says that, yes, I think it's interesting to note a shift on the approach towards photography, architecture, and landscape. Yeah, so what we're saying now.
Yes,
Perfect.
but can I add some?
Okay, guys. Yeah.
Because
of course, please.
I'm wondering also about what's next in our field of architecture, and I have worked in visualization, rendering, and this kind of gigs or jobs, and I'm thinking that
Yeah.
nowadays, or there was a tendency in the previous years that of hyper-realistic images, like to see reality as it is and put the architecture object there. But nowadays it's about constructing a new virtual landscape and an ideal of what you want to be in the future, and that maybe I don't know. I always eager to know what's happening next, because I think that virtuality and the physical world and the virtual world is merging more and more into something that we want. That maybe the physical landscape will not change as much, but I guess that the virtual landscape, it's something that we see changing every day. So from the same point of view of the photography architecture and the architectural objects and the landscape, we can also see our daily lives and the virtual world, how they are more or less merging. It's something very complicated, but
I completely agree, and that's a very clever comment, because we still didn't talk about it. We will talk a lot about it next time, I guess, because I would like to focus on this. But yes, you are completely right. The virtual recreation of the virtual landscape, and so the impact that virtual imageries is having on our conception of things. So the always more ambiguous role of the referent, of reality as a referent, is the fulcrum of what we are immersed in this moment. Let's say we cannot anymore. We cannot any longer avoid to deal with virtuality, because virtuality is part of our world. It's not anymore only, let's say, reality as it appears or its interpretation, but we are starting to create imageries, new realities, new imageries that are superposing themselves with reality and are very important, that are acquiring much more and more importance, and sometimes much more importance than reality itself. And architecture is also impacted by these visions. So it will be something very difficult, as you say, that should be, of course, is analyzed, because there is a field of study that is dedicated to this. Maybe we will tackle a little bit this question also with Davide Tommaso Ferrando when he will come in at the end of November, in November 22, because he is studying a lot this aspect. Is in his research, he's dealing a lot with virtual imageries and with the creation of virtual world, and how they impact on architectural culture, architectural imageries, etc., and urban imageries as well. So yeah, it's very interesting what you say, and it will be part of our discourse for the next 2 lectures. I think it will be a little bit the focus, so we will have the opportunity to think about it. But thank you for raising this question, because of course it is central, crucial. Okay, Omar, it's really interesting that our perceiving gaze is changing after each topic, especially the relation between architectural elements and the outer environment. Yeah, Of course, the aim of this lecture, it was, as I said, it was not, let's say, this lecture was completely arbitrary. Let's say I chose according to my knowledge or my predilections, let's say, or to what I consider to be important, some steps that can be a little bit arbitrary. I could have chosen other steps, but I have chosen them just to give you a little bit the idea of how in each time and according to each cultural context, specific interest also, not only say general evolution of geographical, political, economical, or landscape transformation, etc., but really according to each personal research. The contribution of all these different gazes has been shaping our cultural construct about what is Italian landscape and what we should be interested in when we look at the Italian landscape. So Italian landscape is also made of all these representations that have been superposing one to the other in each epoch. The landscape is made of the real stratifications over the land, as we saw in the cemetery of Modena, as we said many times, but also the stratification of the gazes that are superposed to them. For example, we see the cemetery of Modena through Ghirri's eyes, then through Olivo Barbieri's eyes, or we see, I don't know, the Roman aqueducts before through the eyes of the Alinari brothers, then through the eyes through the eyes of the painters, then to the Alinari brothers, then to Sternfeld. So all these representations are superposing, are stratifying one with each other in order to create a cultural construct that is very heterogeneous, very articulated, and that is always changing, because everything we add to this baggage is going to change, to shift a little bit this perception, our perception and our cultural representation, because from our individual perception and the cultural construct that feeds it are always dialoguing one with each other. Let's say they are part of the same story, but one is on one side we have the singular perception of each person that is shaped by cultural constructs, and it's a twofold relation, because also the perception of each one, maybe especially of the people who have then materialized in images, their perceptions have been have been becoming part of this cultural construct. It is always transforming itself, never fixed. So yeah, we have a responsibility in this sense. We need to look at things, and we need to look at things with the awareness of previous images, but also with, as Ghirri said, with new eyes, with fresh eyes, with trying to break this wall of inconsistency, of invisibility, trying to make the invisible visible, something that is already there and we still don't see because we don't have images that allows us to see it. There are a lot of things that we still need to discover in reality. Other comments, guys? Or else I got to catch my train. I go in the very cold Bozen. I hope that in Piacenza is not so cold. Okay, it seems that you don't have other. It's very cold. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you everybody. Thank you for being there until now, and see you next Monday in presence. So it will be always same hour, so not anymore 9, it was an exception. So on 15 we are going to see each other at 10 and a quarter after past 10 in Piacenza in the classroom. Recorder stop.